Chapter 613. With a single charge, the 2,000-plus enemy troops were scattered and disintegrated. But before Wu Sheng and the others could catch their breath, another team of 1,000 soldiers came from not far away. The two sides met in a narrow street in the city. Only the brave would win, and a chaotic battle ensued. At this moment, Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers fully utilized the 3-on-3 tactic. The three of them worked as one and launched a bayonet charge, as if it was their daily training. Every time a dazzling white bayonet was thrust forward, an enemy would be stabbed and fall to the ground. Intestines and blood flowed everywhere. The brave mercenaries also led the 5,000 Laotian mercenaries behind them. They were originally armed with cold weapons, either broadswords or spears. At this moment, they finally came in handy. Following Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, they also brandished their swords to kill the enemies, showing their strong combat power. The team of 7,000 people was like a torrent of steel, constantly killing the enemy and attracting the enemy's main force. After fighting for half an hour, the situation here finally attracted more soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty. Especially when they heard that the mercenaries did not have guns, some of them felt that the time had come. So they stopped going to the North Gate and went to the East Gate. The pressure at the East Gate was getting stronger and stronger, while the pressure at the North Gate was getting weaker and weaker. When Chunyang and the others launched another long-range shooting, they found that the number of enemies was rapidly decreasing. When they could no longer form a human wall in front of them, Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion decisively said to the correspondent next to him, "Go and inform the 6th young master. The time has come." Yes, the time had come. The first attack at the North Gate and the slaughter at the East Gate were all for the third step, which was the joint attack of Lung Feng's 2nd Battalion, 14 auxiliary battalions, and the 15,000 Laotian mercenaries. Considering that there were 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty in the city, if they all attacked from one gate, it was likely that the gate would be blocked. In the end, they would block the way with only the corpses blocking the way. If that was the case, the enemies would have enough time to escape, which would not achieve the goal of severely injuring the enemy. Therefore, there were two waves of feints. Most of the enemies had gone over to the East Gate, leaving the North Gate empty. When Yang Qindong received the news, he immediately gave the order to launch an all-out attack. More than 20,000 mercenaries poured in from the North Gate, joining up with Spring Sun's cold vanguard, 3 battalions, as they rushed into Dragon River City. The 30,000-strong army was like a whirlwind, and no one could stop them. They used machine guns, submachine guns, and semi-automatic rifles to kill anyone who tried to get close to them. The North Gate suddenly became the main attacking force, which made Duane, who was rushing to the East Gate, turn pale with fright. This confusion confused him. Where exactly was the enemy's main force, and where should he place his troops to defend? At this time, the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty were in a mess. There were even some soldiers who had been rushing back and forth between the North and East Gates. Just as they were about to reach the East Gate from the North Gate, they received a military order to return to the North Gate. These generals were all puzzled and thought about the stupidity of the commanding general. However, they had no choice but to turn around and return to the North Gate. It was obviously too late to turn back now. The mercenaries had entered the city, and they were attacking while stabilizing their defense line. As they pushed forward step by step, the entire 5 streets near the North Gate were successfully taken over by them. After the first step, they began the second step of the attack. The mercenaries divided into more than a dozen teams in different directions, spreading rapidly to the surroundings like a spreading virus, and no one could stop them. A platoon could often be divided into groups. Once they met the enemy's 100-man team, they would raise their guns and fight. With the advantage of weapons, It was easy for a platoon to fight 100. Once they encountered a 1,000-man enemy, they would retreat while fighting, waiting for their enemies to drop dead bodies in the process. Often, as they fought, another mercenary squad would appear from another street. Then they would launch a pincer attack from both sides. The enemy would become dizzy. The enemy would be at a loss. The enemy would be crying for their parents. And the enemy would be littered with corpses. More and more mercenary teams began to show their terrible lethality and destructive power, slowly giving the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty in the city a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere, and that there was nowhere safe. In such an environment, the enemy's morale was rapidly disintegrating. After more than 8 hours of resistance, before night fell, the tight string finally broke. The morale of the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell to the bottom at that moment, and a large number of defeated soldiers and deserters began to appear. The situation was irreversible. Under the blurred vision, the inspectorate could not see the situation on the battlefield clearly, and more people had the opportunity to escape. As some of the bolder ones took the lead to leave, more and more soldiers began to flee. Black shadows could be seen everywhere in the darkness. Some soldiers even sneaked away 20 meters in front of the inspectorate team. It was almost an open and above-board move. General Damon did not notice all of this. Since the mercenaries attacked at 1 o'clock in the afternoon until now, for 5 hours had passed. He was panicking all the time, and now he finally had a chance to have a good rest. Under the protection of a group of guards, he leaned against a battlement at the corner of the street and fell asleep. The environment was not good, and there was not even a simple camp bed. However, to the exhausted General Dagon, this was nothing. All he needed was peace and quiet. That was all. In ancient times, people were malnourished and were prone to night blindness. In addition, it was difficult for people to recognize their comrades and enemies from a long distance in a night battle. Therefore, unless it was necessary, no army was willing to fight at night. In comparison, the mercenaries were naturally fearless. In fact, their daily training included night battle training. But tonight, when there was almost no moon in the sky, Yang Qindong made the unprecedented decision to let everyone rest. Although the battle during the day only lasted for an afternoon because of the large number of enemies, the battle was very fierce from the beginning. This was especially true for the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Not only did they use up all of their ammunition, but they also engaged in hand-to-hand combat. They were so good at using the 3-on-3 tactic that the enemies were terrified. Because of this, 1/3 of the soldiers in the 1st and 2nd Battalions were injured. Although most of the injuries were minor, if they were not treated in time, it would be easy for small problems to become big problems. With so many injured soldiers, they needed to rest. After the hard battle during the day, the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Battalions also needed to rest. In addition, they had used up too much ammunition during the day and urgently needed to replenish it. Yang Qindong simply gave the order for the entire army to rest. He believed that after a good night's sleep, the soldiers would be full of energy the next day and return to the fierce battlefield. Other than the soldiers who were in charge of night duty, most of the soldiers leaned on each other or found a relatively clean place to lie down and sleep. As the commander-in-chief, Yang Qindong did not rest with everyone. With the existence of the key, he only needed to rest for 2 hours a day to recover to his peak condition. Occasionally, it was not a problem for him to not sleep for a night. Without rest, he led Beta Persei and some of the members of the 1st Guard Squad to walk through the streets that they had previously occupied. The entire street was still filled with the stench of blood. Although most of the corpses had been moved away, the blood could not be washed away in a short period of time. When the stench of blood was combined together, it was inevitable that it would give rise to a very unpleasant smell that made people want to vomit. Fortunately, it was not the first time that the soldiers of the Cold Front and the auxiliary soldiers were on the battlefield. Although the smell was unpleasant, it was not unbearable. Besides, why would people care about the smell when they were tired? In this way, under the unpleasant smell, the soldiers of the mercenary army fell asleep everywhere in the streets and alleys. They were not cut down to the ground, but they were so tired that they simply found an open space to sleep. In the battle during the day, the army of the Golden Bien dynasty showed a strong resistance. Don was indeed worthy of the title of the first general. His tenacious fighting spirit made the mercenaries put in a lot of effort. Coupled with the role of the inspectorate, they fully showed the demeanor of a strong second-class army. Previously, Yang Qindong divided the army into 4 classes. The strong Cold Front was the first class. When the number of enemies was too high, a second-class army was enough to threaten a first-class army. This battle was a bit difficult, so it was reasonable that the soldiers were tired. Walking on the street, Yang Qindong's eyes were filled with adorable and tired soldiers. Once he noticed that a soldier's hands and feet were exposed outside of the blanket, Yang Qindong would step forward and help cover them up again. If the soldiers knew about this scene, they would be extremely excited. After all, it was their 6th young master who personally helped them to tuck in the corners of their blankets. Yang Qindong wasn't the only one who helped. Yang Qindong, who was beside him, and the members of the first guard team who followed him also helped. There were too many soldiers, and they were too tired, except for the Cold Front, who was equipped with a sleeping bag and did not need to worry about catching a cold. The auxiliary soldiers and the Laotian mercenaries did not have such conditions. While covering the soldiers with the quilt, Yang Qindong said to Beta Persei beside him, "Tomorrow, arrange for people to go to Resin City and have them produce more sleeping bags. Our soldiers can't fall sick because of lack of rest. This is a great injustice to them." "Young master, I will remember." Beta Persei nodded heavily. This was the young master's concern for the soldiers. Such an order must be passed down as soon as possible. Chapter 614. There is a price to pay for hard work. At the same night, one side's commander was sleeping soundly with countless deserters under his command. The other side's commander was running on the path of caring for the soldiers. The soldiers had a good rest, and when the new day came, they would be more powerful. From this point of view, the outcome was clear. The sky finally brightened. Beta Persei, who was beside Yang Qindong, had been replaced by Tiger's Mane. He was busy making a bowl of hot porridge and sending it over. "6th young master, the porridge just came out of the pot. Try it." "Okay." Yang Qindong took the porridge, took a sip, and sighed. "It tastes good, and it has a lot of calories." "Very good." He. Although the porridge was not made by himself, Tiger's Mane grinned when he saw that Yang Qindong was satisfied. "By the way, have the other soldiers drunk?" Yang Qindong just sighed, and then focused on the soldiers. "They are all queuing up to drink. By the way, young master, the scouts have sent information that at least half of the enemies escaped last night. Today's battle should be much easier." When it came to business, Tiger's Mane also restrained his smile and changed into a serious look. "Well, this time the enemy is more stubborn, and their strength is still barely enough. Fighting with such an enemy will be of great help to improve the combat power and will of the soldiers. But at the same time, This is also the main force of the Gilded Dynasty. According to the intelligence of the Security Bureau, defeating them is equivalent to breaking their backbone. It will be much easier to conquer them next. At this point, Yang Qindong raised his head and poured the entire bowl of porridge into his mouth. At this time, he had a heroic aura on his face. Pass down the order. We'll launch the attack in half an hour. Deep in Chuanlong City, compared to Yang Qindong's heroism and hot-bloodedness, Dagon's face was filled with rage. Who would have thought that after he woke up from his sleep, he would realize that more than 50,000 of his soldiers had run away in just one night, including those who had died on the battlefield yesterday. He now had less than 50,000 soldiers that he could use. What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to open the South City Gate? Where did those people escape from? Don't tell me all 50,000 of them jumped down from the tower? Dagon asked in disbelief. If it was only a few hundred soldiers using ropes and other objects to escape from the city gate tower, he could still understand. However, how could he accept the fact that 50,000 people escaped in one night? The bodyguard, who was asked, had a bitter look on his face. Knowing that the general was angry, not only could he not leave, but he could only stay here and explain. Thus, he carefully answered, "General, it was the captain guarding the southern gate who opened the gate and escaped. So, bastard!" After hearing the explanation, Dagon raised his leg and kicked him. The bodyguard, who was half kneeling, was unlucky. He fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ignoring the soldier's pain, Dagon pulled out the saber on his waist and roared. "So what if 50,000 people escaped? I still have 50,000 men, which is more than the mercenaries. Today, I will fight them to the death." Dagon's words were filled with pride, but the dozen or so bodyguards beside him all fell to their knees and pleaded, "General, you can't do that. Now that the morale of the army is low and the soldiers are exhausted, we can't fight anymore. Where there's life, there's hope. General, please take a step back and regroup. If we fight again another day, we will definitely win. There's an imbalance of power between us and the enemy. You can't use force, General." "General, please reconsider." The bodyguards made all kinds of sounds. Their purpose was the same, which was to persuade Dagon to retreat. The army had lost its morale. If they fought now, they would only suffer heavy losses. Yesterday, they had 150,000 men, but they did not gain the slightest advantage. They lost tens of thousands and injured tens of thousands. They did not think that they could defeat the mercenaries with only 50,000 men. The bodyguards were not afraid of death, but they thought that it was not worth it to die in such a bloody battle. It would be better to take a step back and fight again after the army was reorganized. That way, the chances of winning would be much higher. You guys? At first, Dagon was unafraid of death, but the bodyguards seemed to be in the same tone. They kept persuading him, which made Dagon's momentum stagnate. Then, his head drooped down like a lifeless puppet. How could Dagon not know that it would be foolish of him to fight the mercenaries under such circumstances? But he was not willing to give up. The 150,000 men under him were the most elite force of the Golden Bien dynasty. With more than 3 times the number of men, the defense of the city wall, and their familiarity with the terrain, they could not defeat the mercenaries. He really did not know how to win. He had a feeling that once he gave up here, it would be difficult to defeat the mercenaries again. But if he continued to fight, how could he win with insufficient troops and low morale? If he retreated, it would be difficult to win. If he fought, he might be wiped out. This was a dilemma to begin with, but he still had to make a choice. Dagon sighed, and the sword in his hand fell to the ground. Forget it, forget it. If that's the case, let's retreat. Inform the soldiers in the city to withdraw as much as possible, then prepare to set fire. Even if we leave, we can't let the enemy have a good time. Dagon finally made the decision to retreat, which made the bodyguards happy. This proved that they did not have to die, so they nodded and agreed. But before they could pass the order, the familiar gunshots suddenly sounded, and then became more and more frequent. It seemed that they were not far away. Not good. The mercenaries are attacking. General, let's go, or I'm afraid it's too late. The bodyguards heard the gunshots that were getting closer and closer. Their faces changed drastically, and they rushed to Dagon's side. If he did not retreat, they would carry him and retreat. Retreat. Dagon wanted to say something tough, but he did not know why when he heard the gunshots. He was a little scared. Perhaps it was the psychological trauma left by yesterday's battle. But since the enemy had attacked, and he was not fully prepared, it would be meaningless to continue fighting. It was better to retreat now, and save some strength anyway. Dagon escaped, and before he left, he gave the order for the entire army to retreat. However, because the mercenaries had launched their attack too early, and because they had replenished their ammunition, many of the enemies were caught before they could escape. In the end, only 20,000 of the 50,000 managed to escape. After General Dagon fled, the mercenaries did not pursue, but began to clean up the enemy forces in the city. The battle lasted from morning to night, and the situation was basically stabilized. Compared to yesterday, Lung Feng did not have any casualties today, and only 3 soldiers were slightly injured. 13 auxiliary soldiers were killed, and 100 were injured. More than 100 Laotian mercenaries were killed, and more than 1,000 were injured. In exchange, they captured more than 40,000 enemies and killed more than 10,000 enemies. In addition to yesterday's battle, they killed more than 30,000 enemies and captured 50,000 enemies in the Battle of Chuanlong City. More than half of the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Border Dynasty were killed, and 80,000 of them were killed. Hurry up and search for anything edible and useful in the city. The troops will rest as they move. We will rest for one more night. Tomorrow morning, we will move towards Suwung City. After Yang Qindong received the final battle statistics, he immediately issued a new order. In the morning of the second day, the main force of the mercenaries went straight out of Longchuan City, and in just 2 days, they arrived outside Suwung City. Suwung City was one of the biggest cities in the Golden Border Dynasty, and it was an important crossroad to the capital of the Golden Border Dynasty. From here, one could enter Golden Rim City from Pingshan City in the north. One could also enter Bolomian City in the east. It could be said that once this place was taken, the initiative would change hands, and Golden Border City would face the possibility of being besieged at any time. The news spread like the wind to the south, and when it reached Golden Border City, King Boromir was so shocked that he almost fell off his dragon throne. The civil and military officials didn't have a good reaction either. Some of them were pale because of fear, some of them were red because of anger, and some of them clenched their fists because they wanted to go to the front lines and fight to the death with the mercenaries. Their reactions were different, but the same thing was that they all felt the existence of danger and the feeling of a knife on their necks. Trash! Trash! What the hell is Dagon doing? 150,000 people can't even stop 40,000 from the enemy? Didn't he claim to be the #1 general of our country? Is this how he behaves? After digesting the defeat at the front line, Boromir roared. He was just venting out the dissatisfaction in his heart. Then, he began to read out the royal orders regarding the current situation. First, send the army forward to meet up with General Dagon, who was setting up defenses in Suwung City. Although the general did not perform well in the Battle of Longchuan City, now was not the time to punish him, and he had to be used to stop the mercenaries. Second, urge the 2 allies, Siam and Ava, to send out their troops quickly. If they did not send out their troops, the Golden Border Dynasty would be gone, and the alliance would cease to exist. At this moment, the Siam army and flag could be seen outside the south gate of Wanxiang City, the capital of Laos province. Siam had sent 100,000 soldiers to Wanxiang City earlier than King Boromir had expected. Behind them, there were another 100,000 soldiers in Wulong City, the largest city in the north of Siam. They could provide reinforcements at any time. The general leading the army was named Godin. He was the representative of the younger generation of the Siamese military. He was only 35 years old, but he was already the commander of an army of 200,000. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was favored by the king. Chapter 6:15. Riding on a horse, dressed in a general's armor, Lan Tsang's face was full of confidence. Below Wanxiang City, Godin was full of pride and arrogance. Beside Godin was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. This person was like a ghost who always made the right choice on the battlefield, escaping the pursuit and punishment of the mercenaries time and time again. This time, Fan Yuhai followed the Siam army and brought along 5,000 elite cavalrymen. After many rounds of elimination, the remaining 5,000 were undoubtedly the best of the best. According to Yang Qindong's evaluation, they had surpassed the standard of a second-class army and were moving towards a first-class army. General Fan, how long do you think it will take for our army to conquer Wanxiang City? With an arrogant expression, Godin raised his head as he spoke, as if he would not be able to match his status if he did not do so. General Fan, the Siam army is made up of elite soldiers. It's just a small Wanxiang City. We should be able to conquer it in less than 3 days. Fan Yuhai's face was calm and even seemed a little low-key. He was not as arrogant as Godin, but even so he had a dazzling aura and was not to be underestimated. Ha ha ha! Hearing Fan Yuhai's reply, Godin laughed out loud. All right, I'll take your blessings. Come on, charge and conquer Wanxiang City within 3 days. Then, I'll allow you to conquer the city for 1 day. Conquering the city for 1 day meant that within 1 day after conquering the city, the soldiers could take whatever they wanted. As long as they took it, it would belong to them, and they would not have to hand it over. This was a special reward for the soldiers. Kill, kill, kill! When the soldiers heard the benefits promised by the general, they all roared loudly, bursting with a strong fighting spirit and morale. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, the governor of Laos, Luan Shaochen, was supporting himself on the battlements. His eyes were filled with determination as he looked at the 100,000 Siam soldiers below the city. The speed of the Siam army's appearance was far beyond Luan Shaochen's imagination. However, he was not afraid, not to mention the strong confidence that Yang Qindong brought him. He himself had a strong confidence at the moment. All of this came from the company of Lung Feng, 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers, and the 10,000 Laos mercenaries led by General He Guang. With a strong city and 10,000 strong soldiers by his side, Luan Shaochen had no reason to be afraid of the 100,000 Siam soldiers. Furthermore, the 6th young master would soon hear about what happened here. He only needed to defend for a while, and reinforcements would arrive. That would be the moment of victory. Everyone, get ready for battle. Lung Feng and the auxiliary troops aim and shoot. Whoever dares to approach the catapults will die. At a distance of 300 meters, the sound of an explosion would not affect the soldiers guarding the city and could even kill the enemy. It couldn't be any better. However, this was just a method. The real battle depended on the performance of both sides. How to prevent the enemy's catapults from getting close to the city and not letting them do their job was the most important thing in a city defense battle. 1 li was 500 meters. At such a distance, if it was a cold weapon battle, it would be impossible to do anything. As the defending side, No matter what kind of bow and arrow they used, they would not be able to hit the catapults from such a distance. They could only shrink back and let the enemy attack. Since the enemy could not hit accurately, it was all about luck. The same thing happened to the mercenaries, but it was different. They had the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, which could easily hit the catapults up to 600 meters away. Naturally, they had the ability to control the catapults. What they needed to do now was to prevent the enemy from getting close. Yuan Shaoqian gave the order. The Long Feng Company and the auxiliary soldiers, who were in charge of the first batch of attacks, looked for the best positions. They focused their attention and waited for the enemy's catapults to get closer. In their line of sight, the catapults with large wooden wheels were slowly approaching. As long as they got close enough, they would be able to hit the catapults with boulders. Regardless of the effect, at least the momentum would be there. Then, when the soldiers charged with all their might, if they were lucky, they would be able to set up scaling ladders. Perhaps they would be able to take down the city tower in one go. If they were unlucky, it would be a battle of distance. In the end, the weaker side would be the winner. 700 meters, 650 meters. A soldier from the Long Feng Company made a judgment with his sharp eyesight. His voice was heard by his comrades. Even if the catapults were 700 meters away, they would still be able to hit them with their rifles. However, they did not do so in order to pursue accuracy. They did not want to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. 620 meters. 600 meters. Fire! When the Siamese soldiers finally reached the optimal firing range, gunshots rang out. Because it was daytime, they couldn't see the gunfire clearly, but the sound of gunfire did not stop. Then, the Siamese soldiers around the catapults fell to the ground one by one as if they had been bewitched. Is this the power of the new repeating rifles? Not bad. Riding on his horse, General Gordon squinted his eyes with an arrogant expression. Then, his surprise turned into excitement. Before they came, the military had obtained some information about the mercenaries. Naturally, they could not hide something like the rifles from them. After meeting Fan Yuhai, he had a better understanding of the situation. The first time he met Fan Yuhai, he was indeed shocked. At the same time, his greed was completely ignited. In Gordon's eyes, he had brought 100,000 soldiers with him and could mobilize another 100,000 soldiers behind him. However, dealing with Wanxiang City, which only had 10,000 soldiers, was as easy as using a cannon to kill a mosquito. In fact, he even thought that the moment he arrived with his army, the domineering aura would cause the mercenaries to immediately open the city and surrender. Things didn't go as he expected, but Gugu wasn't too disappointed. Are you not convinced? Want to fight? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. I'll beat you until you can't fight anymore. From the perspective of a victor, the enemy's belongings would eventually belong to him. Didn't that mean that after he won, these repeating rifles would also become his spoils of war? He thought that once he had all these and the number of troops, he would become an invincible army. At that time, Siam would inevitably become the core of this region and enjoy a glorious situation like the Great Ming Dynasty, where thousands of countries came to pay homage to it. As the general who had made the greatest contribution to the war, wouldn't he also have great power and authority and be respected by everyone? Gordon, who was still in a state of fantasy, was quickly interrupted by Fan Yuhai. General Gordon, did you see that? The repeating rifles of the mercenaries are very powerful and accurate. It's time to send in the Iron Shield soldiers. Fan Yuhai continued to tell the secret of the Iron Shield's ability to block bullets to the Siam Kingdom, just like how he told the destroyed Lansang Kingdom. Back then, he organized a battle to attack and defend Hanoi City. Now, he was going to do the same to attack and defend Wanxiang City. The difference was that Yuan Shaoqian, who was also a provincial governor, was very careful. He guarded every city gate and made it impossible for them to launch a sneak attack. They had no choice but to attack the city openly. Chapter 6:16. However, it did not matter. This time, Siam had mobilized 150,000 soldiers, which was far more than the Lansang kingdom had mobilized previously. As for the 5,000 cavalrymen that he brought with him, they were there as bystanders. If everything went well, he would not mind getting a share of the loot. If not, he would run as fast as he could. In short, he would not let the mercenaries catch him. Not bad. Men, order the Iron Shield soldiers to lead the charge. Although Gordon was unhappy that Fan Yuhai had disrupted his fantasy, this was a war. Every soldier that died was another loss. Hence, he decided to listen to Fan Yuhai and send out the Iron Shield soldiers. Iron shields that were more than 8 centimeters thick could block bullets from muskets. Iron shields that were more than 10 centimeters thick could also block bullets from muskets in close combat. This had been proven countless times. Before the war, Siam had mobilized a lot of resources and gathered a lot of blacksmiths in the country to forge 5,000 iron shields. The shields were held by 5,000 strong men to defend against the enemy's muskets. Under Gordon's command, the 5,000 Iron Shield soldiers appeared. Once the 5-meter-tall iron shield was set up, it could cover their entire body and protect them from the threat of firearms. It's the Iron Shield soldiers. On the city wall, the Lung Feng soldiers cried out in shock. However, that was all they could do. They were not worried. They did not forget that Governor Xiao Wan had led them to bury many mines. Those were the best weapons against the Iron Shield soldiers. The Iron Shield soldiers can only protect a portion of the people. Look for opportunities to attack those who are not protected. Yuan Shaoqian's expression did not change as he spoke calmly. What happened this time was a test for him. If he could fend off Siam's attack, he would not only be an outstanding local governor, but also a capable general. His knowledge of both civil and military affairs would allow him to walk a better and broader path in the future. The general did not panic, and the soldiers were confident. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers began to look for opportunities to fire continuously. Although this could not stop the enemy from approaching, it was still able to eliminate the enemy's strength to a certain extent. At the same time, it was also a considerable deterrent. Once the shield was out, the gunshots continued. Compared to before, it was much more sporadic. Gordon, who was on his horse, laughed. He could bear such a loss. As long as the main force of the army could approach the city walls, with the help of the trebuchets, their morale would definitely soar. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would be able to seize control of the city walls after a few attempts and obtain the final victory. After the Siamese soldiers threw down hundreds of corpses, the catapults were finally positioned at a distance of 500 meters. Then, boulders were lifted out of the catapults. With the help of levers, the boulders flew into the air and smashed towards Wanxiang City. From afar, the momentum was astonishing, but the weakness was also very obvious. Out of 10 boulders thrown out, it was already very good if one of them hit the city tower. Most of them hit the city wall, causing the ground to shake, but it did not affect the overall situation. But it had to be said that the trebuchet's momentum was still very impressive. Under its encouragement, more and more Siamese soldiers followed behind the shield-wielding soldiers and began to move forward step by step. Sher could even see the appearance of scaling ladders through the cracks. This was a great tool for climbing the city walls. Hit them hard. Above the southern city wall, Yuan Shaoqian could clearly see the enemy slowly approaching because of the high ground. The shield could only protect the front of the soldiers and not the top of their heads. Therefore, The enemy's head was clearly displayed in front of the defenders. They did not even need to aim. All they needed to do was fire a shot at the top of the enemy's head, and one of them would die. This made Cold Vanguard's auxiliary soldiers feel very good. However, they were more excited to see what would happen when the enemy entered the 300-meter-long defensive line. 50 meters left, 30 meters left, 10 meters. Lung Feng was still using his vision to estimate the enemy's position. Boom, 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 boom. Finally, when the first row of shield bearers crossed the 300-meter battle line, the mines were triggered, and a loud explosion rang out. The powerful force blasted the shield bearers away, and the huge force sent countless people into the air. The aftermath of the explosion was like a huge wave on the sea, overturning the mountains and overturning the seas, throwing one enemy after another to the ground. At this moment, the Siamese army suffered heavy losses. Not only were more than half of the 5,000 shield-wielding soldiers killed, but most of their shields were also blown into pieces. The Siamese soldiers behind the shield-wielding soldiers were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Hit them. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. We still have a lot of ammunition in the palace. Hit them hard. Wan Shaochen also took a 95-style pistol and opened up a burst of fire towards the city walls. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, who were originally in charge of the replacements, were also mobilized. The 900 soldiers were firing at full capacity. At this moment, they were fighting to their heart's content and killing to their heart's content. Under the dual threat of landmines and muskets, the Siamese soldiers, who had lost thousands of soldiers, lost their morale and began to retreat. They trampled over each other as they retreated. Many soldiers died at the feet of their comrades. In such an environment, those who were pushed to the ground would never get up again. How did this happen? How did this happen? What the hell was that thing that exploded? What was that? Seeing his soldiers falling to the ground in droves and turning into corpses, seeing the metal shields being thrown all over the place, some of them even deformed, and seeing the majestic army retreating like frightened rabbits, Gordon was enraged. He turned and stared at Fan Yuhai. His eyes were red and burning with rage. Fan Yuhai was also shocked by the scene before him. He had not seen the mercenaries use such weapons in the previous battles, so he was not prepared. He had forgotten that most of the previous battles were sieges. The use of landmines was naturally limited. In the only battle of Hanoi City, he did not want to destroy the commercial street. Moreover, the Jiaoji army was charging ferociously and did not have time to plant landmines. Hence, he did not use them. However, it did not mean that they could not be used. Now, they finally came in handy. They caught the Siamese army off guard and dealt a heavy blow. The effect was shocking. These are landmines. Actually, the Ming dynasty has used them before, but they were not this powerful. Fan Yuhai was indeed a famous general in Jiaoji. He quickly thought of the deceased generals Wang Genwang and Chen Heijin. Both of them had encountered such things in the rainforest. They even said that the mercenaries called them landmines. They were powerful weapons that would explode upon contact. Didn't this match what was happening before him? Landmines? Since you knew, why didn't you say so earlier? Gordon continued to blame him. Obviously, he did not want to bear the consequences of losing the first battle. He wanted to push all the blame to someone else. Fan Yuhai did not answer. Instead, he looked to the front and said calmly, "General Gordon, let's retreat first. There is no one controlling the catapults. The morale is low. Let's regroup and prepare for battle." Following Fan Yuhai's gaze, Gordon noticed that his trebuchets had stopped working and the soldiers in front of the trebuchets were all lying on the ground. It was obvious that this was the result of the continuous firing of the flintlocks. They had lost the first battle, just like that. Although Godin didn't want to admit it, he knew that this wasn't the time for loyalty. He could only grit his teeth and say helplessly, "Beat the gong to retreat. Retreat 5 miles." The Siamese army retreated. They did not even want the bodies of the soldiers, catapults, and shields. The resources were all within the firing range of the mercenaries' muskets. Who could snatch them back? Unless they launched an all-out attack. However, if the problem of landmines was not solved, could they really do it? Victory! The enemy ran away with their tails between their legs. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, when the Siamese army retreated, cheers erupted like a tsunami. It was like a farewell song, mocking the incompetence of the Siamese army. Don't move. Soldiers, go down and clean up the battlefield. Bring back those that can be brought back, and burn those that can't. Wan Xiaoqin's face was flushed with excitement. However, as the commander, he suppressed his excitement and spoke calmly. They could only send the soldiers down because the landmines were not completely destroyed. If they sent someone else, the landmines might explode and cause unpredictable consequences. After that, the soldiers of Cold Vanguard carried barrels of kerosene out of the city. There were too many enemy corpses, and the best way to collect them was to burn them all. Otherwise, with so many corpses, it was inevitable that germs would appear and cause a plague. The Siamese army, which had already retreated, could only watch helplessly as the mercenaries carried out their operations below the city walls. They had tried to wreak havoc earlier, but they were quickly met with a barrage of gunfire from the top of the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat after throwing down hundreds of fresh corpses. This made General Gordon even angrier. He stomped his feet and cursed in the barracks at the back. However, there was nothing he could do. "General Gordon, please don't be angry. The most important thing now is to find a way to destroy their landmines. Otherwise, we will be in a passive position." Fan Yuhai was not a subordinate of Gordon, and he had his own 5,000 cavalrymen. Although he did not have a large number of soldiers, he was powerful. When he faced Gordon, he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. He felt detached from the situation. Solve? How? It would have been better if he did not mention it. When he mentioned it, Gordon was furious. Before the battle started, Fan Yuhai said that conquering Wanxiang City would be a piece of cake. Why didn't he say that there were landmines? He caused Gordon to lose thousands of men and horses in the first battle. He even lost 2/3 of his iron shields that could block muskets. Now, he had less than 2,000 iron shields. His preparations were destroyed in an instant. He was in a passive position now. Since the Han people were useful, he would capture all the people who did the statistics. However, this would take a few days. Godin thought that he had grasped the method to deal with the mercenaries. However, what he did not know was that as his troops approached Wanxiang City, he initiated a provocation. This was equivalent to giving the mercenaries an excuse to deal a heavy blow to Siam. Some people would ask, Yang Qindong is leading the 2nd and 3rd Regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division into the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty. Most of the Navy's Cold Front Division can only be on duty at sea. Now that Wanxiang City is under siege by the enemy, where are the soldiers coming from? Don't forget, before the war started, when the matter with the Solingen family was still brewing, Yang Qindong had disappeared for a period of time. It was during that period of time that he had already set up a trap for Siam. At that time, he thought that once the mercenaries and the Phnom Penh dynasty started a war, this country would definitely be restless. Since Yang Qindong was personally involved, how could the battle array be too small? Otherwise, it would not match his status. In fact, the commander that he left behind in Siam was one of the 2 heads of Yang Xie's military, the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, Lung Song. Wollonggu was also known as Wulong Thani City. It was one of the biggest cities in the north of Siam. At the same time, it was also the rear of Gordon's 100,000 soldiers. It was used to provide military supplies and for emergency use. However, there were only 50,000 soldiers here. 500 of them were sent to capture the Han civilians. At this moment, such a large city was secretly surrounded by the mercenaries led by Commander Lung Song. 20 days ago, Lung Song was ordered by Yang Chendong to secretly enter the country with the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division and 8 auxiliary battalions. They hid in the dense forest. They even saw with their own eyes that Gordon led 100,000 soldiers out of Wolonga City and headed straight for Wanxiang City. At that time, they could have set up an ambush. However, Lung Song did not do so. After that, they saw the 50,000 soldiers out of the city. However, they still did not make a move. In Yang Chendong's words, now was not the time to start a full-scale war with Siam. If they took the initiative to attack, it would be unjustifiable. Their military strength was limited. This was the shortcoming of the mercenaries. In a war where they could not win, such a war was not worth the effort. After seeing another 50,000 soldiers pass by, Lung Song immediately carried out the military operation plan formulated by the 6th Young Master. He started to plan for Wolonga City. The plan was divided into 3 parts. First, secretly enter Wolonga City and attack them from the inside. Second, severely injure the 50,000 soldiers of Siam and burn their military supplies and provisions. They would have no choice but to return. Third, when Gordon returned, the mercenaries would give up on Wolonga City and ambush them. They would try their best to eliminate their forces so that they would not have the energy to invade Wanxiang City. As long as these 3 points were achieved, Yang Chendong would have enough time to settle the matter of the Phnom Penh dynasty and reach the final conclusion of the peace talks. Yes, this time Yang Chendong did not intend to swallow the Phnom Penh dynasty. He did not have such a big appetite. He had not even occupied Vietnam and Laos for a long time. The internal affairs had not been settled yet. How could he take over the Phnom Penh dynasty? If he really did that, there would not be enough manpower to protect and manage the place. It would only benefit other countries. Yang Chendong would not do such a loss-making deal. Lung Song quietly left Chichen City. Although he was the commander of a division and the only division commander in the army, he would be credited for any results that the Lung vanguard achieved on the front line. However, how could the fruits of victory be better than the fruits of victory obtained by himself? This time, Yang Chen finally transferred him out and gave him great expectations. Lung Song held his breath in his heart. Not only did he have to complete the task, but he also had to complete the task at the smallest cost. He had to show the heads of his subordinates that he didn't rely on his seniority, but he had the real ability. He had great ambitions and was especially attentive in executing the 6th Young Master's military plan. He first sent people to disguise themselves as the Phnom Penh dynasty's caravan and entered Wolong City. In order not to attract attention, the Lung vanguard entered the city in groups of 3 to 5 people and kept a low profile. They entered different inns in the city like a drop of water thrown into a river. No one would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear behind them. In addition, there was only 1 battalion of the Lung vanguard that entered the city. The 400 people were divided into many groups and entered the city separately. For a city with a population of 100,000 people and 50,000 soldiers, this number of people was really nothing. They did not reveal themselves. A battalion of the Lung vanguard entered the city, indicating that the first step of the plan was successful. After the news of Gordon attacking Wanxiang City came, they had an excuse to start the war. Now, they would fight in self-defense. Lung Song arranged for his scouts to enter the city and contact the Lung vanguard warriors. They decided to attack Wulong City tonight. The battalion commander of the 1st Regiment's 3rd Battalion, Xiao Yining, entered the city. This person had displayed astonishing leadership skills in the process of reclaiming and pacifying Ryukyu Island. In addition, he was qualified. Thus, he naturally became the 3rd Battalion commander of the 1st Regiment. Many people were envious that he could enter the 1st Regiment and become a battalion commander of the Lung Vanguard Battalion. But to him, this was nothing. His goal in life was not limited to being a battalion commander. In his opinion, he should at least be a division commander. Only then would it be awe-inspiring and be considered a true glory. There was no need to doubt the ability of a person with such ambitions. After secretly meeting with the scouts in the city and receiving the new military order, Xiao Yining began to run around, quickly contacting all his subordinates. They agreed that they would act in the middle of the night to take down Wulongnan City Gate and lead the main army into the city. Compared to the flames of war on the front lines, there were soldiers and horses. Wulong City, which was at the rear, could be said to be peaceful and prosperous. They were also fighting with mercenaries. As the main attacker, there was naturally no pressure. Furthermore, Siam's military strength had always been at the top of the nearby countries. This made them think that they were saints, and everyone else was mortals. With such an arrogant mentality and the stimulation of the 50,000 Siam soldiers entering the city, the entire Wulong City fell into a false state of prosperity. With a large population, it was naturally easy to do all kinds of business. For example, the restaurants, casinos, and especially the brothels in the city were filled with people and were extremely lively. Even if the front lines reported that the attack was not going well, it did not seem to affect them much. They could do whatever they wanted and enjoy themselves as much as they wanted. Of course, they did not do nothing. For example, after receiving General Gordon's orders, they sent out 50,000 soldiers to capture the Han people in other cities and towns. Chapter 6:18. Just like how Yang Qindong would think that those who were not of the same race were not of the same race, the people of Siam also had the same thought. No matter how many years these Han people had lived in their country, as long as they were Han people or their descendants, they were not to be trusted. Their status was also the lowest. Now that they had to capture these people, the soldiers sent out to carry out this mission did not feel any burden at all. It was as if it was only right to treat the Han people however they wanted. The soldiers swaggered through the streets and left. Naturally, their mission was leaked. When Xiao Yining heard that the enemy troops were going to capture Han people, he sensed that something was wrong. This made him even more determined to take action tonight. When the news reached the ears of the other Lung Feng soldiers, they were enraged. They could not wait to destroy Wulong City and disrupt the enemy's plan. Amidst the torment, night finally arrived. The sky was getting darker and darker. When the watches of the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Front Battalion showed 11 o'clock at night, they began to walk out of the inns. Then, like ghosts in the night, they split into dozens of groups and slowly and carefully moved toward the southern gate of Wulong City. The Siamese soldiers were too careless. They did not expect the enemy to infiltrate their rear. The soldiers guarding the gate were completely unprepared. Originally, there were 1,000 soldiers guarding the gate. However, there were less than 300 soldiers left. The other 700 soldiers had applied for leave to play in the city. Arrogance and arrogance were bad habits that should not exist in an army. If an army had these habits, it could only be said that they were not far from being destroyed. When Xiao Yining led the 400 Lung Feng soldiers to the south gate, he saw the enemy's morale was low. Wait a minute, something is not right. Seeing that there were only about 300 enemies in front of him, Xiao Yining instinctively stopped moving forward. He led the soldiers to hide in the shadows. Go, find the brothers who stayed here. Without Xiao Yining's order, the Lung Feng soldiers who stayed here to observe the situation found him first. They then explained the situation to him. Battalion commander, the enemy did not notice us. There should be 1,000 soldiers here, but most of them applied for leave to play in the city. Even the Chili Arch left. Is that so? Xiao Yining was shocked when he heard this. He didn't dare to think that something like this could happen. If something similar happened in Lungfeng, everyone from the highest officer to the lowest squad leader would be punished. They would be given demerits, and it was even possible that they would be expelled from the military. Needless to say, the Siamese soldiers were truly blessed. Some of them even wanted to scream before they died, but when a large hand appeared in front of their eyes and reached their mouths, everything was over. A total of 300 enemies, except for one Siamese soldier, who was stabbed in the wrong spot and died after a scream. The other 299 people didn't have the chance to make a sound. Xiao Yining stared at the Lung Feng, who made a mistake. Fortunately, there were no more enemies at the south gate. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. Open the gate, send the signal, and lead the army into the city. Xiao Yining immediately stopped and ordered. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. Outside the south gate, Lung Song led the 1st and 2nd battalions and 8 auxiliary battalions of the 1st battalion to wait. Everyone's eyes were resolute as they stared straight ahead. They didn't even blink for a long time. Commander, there are only 2 minutes left. Will Battalion Commander Xiao and his men encounter any problems? Political Commissar Mo Chengyu asked worriedly. Commander, why don't I lead my men up the tower? I don't mean to brag, but this tower is only 12 meters tall. My men, and I will only need a minute to climb it. 2nd Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang sounded more anxious as he spoke in a hoarse voice. Don't we still have 2 minutes? Let's wait a little longer. We have to have faith in Battalion Commander Xiao, Lung Song said calmly. How could he not know the capabilities of his own battalion commander and Lung Feng? Even if there was an accident, he should have heard gunshots. However, there was no movement, so why was he so anxious? As soon as Lung Song finished speaking, the south gate 400 meters away slowly opened from the inside. A bright torch appeared and flickered 3 times to the left and 3 times to the right. Haha, we did it! Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang couldn't help but laugh excitedly. He could finally enter the city and start a massacre. During this period of time, the 1st Regiment had been carrying out missions in Crimson City dealing with the captives and other matters that were sent to the island. He was already tired of it and couldn't wait to show off his skills on the battlefield. Now, the opportunity had finally presented itself. That's our secret signal. Advance. Lung Song carefully looked through the night vision binoculars. After confirming that it was Xiao Yining's secret signal, he gave the order. Then, the 4,000 mercenaries stood up from the ground and crazily rushed forward. In front of the south gate, the city gate had been completely opened, allowing the mercenaries to rush in. Lung Song appeared in front of Xiao Yining along with the army. Battalion Commander Xiao, you've worked hard. How's the situation? Commander, the south gate has been controlled. The enemies in the city have no other defenses. Xiao Yining gave a standard military salute and replied. Very good. Lung Song nodded approvingly. This result was better than he expected. Originally, he thought that with 400 mercenaries against 1,000, they would have to make some noise. That way, the city gate could be opened, but the enemy would be alerted and counterattack. But now, the city gate was occupied, and the enemy was kept in the dark. This way, they had more time to set up their plans. Since the enemy hasn't noticed, we can't follow the first plan. Let's go with the second plan. Lung Song said in high spirits. The second plan was to enter the city without alerting the enemy. Then, with the Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion as one unit, they would march separately. This way, his troops would be divided into 21 units. If they appeared in various parts of the city and fought at night, it would give the enemy the impression that they were everywhere. With more than 4,000 men, they would be able to unleash 10 times the power. It would be more effective in conquering and destroying Wulong City. Fortunately, Lung Song had prepared the second plan, although at that time, he didn't think it would work. However, due to the carelessness of the Siamese soldiers and the perfect performance of Xiao Yining's 3 battalions, the second plan could be implemented. Suppressing his excitement, Lung Song gathered the 13 company commanders of Lung Fong and the 8 battalion commanders of Lung Fong. Follow Plan 2. Get to the designated location as fast as you can. Remember, try not to make any noise before you get there. Even if you accidentally encounter an enemy, it's best if you can deal with them without making a sound. When it's 1 o'clock, everyone will attack with all their might. Understood? Chapter 619. Lung Song held a map of Wulong City that he had prepared a long time ago and spoke to his subordinates. Familiarize yourself with your destination. If you don't understand, come and ask me. Now, I will give you 5 minutes to prepare and assemble your troops before we depart. Before they came, the officers had already imprinted the first and second plans in their minds. How could anyone not be familiar with them now? Therefore, after nodding their heads, they went to gather their troops and instructed them to not make any noise as much as possible and to arrive at the designated location as quietly as possible. If they wanted to kill the enemy, they would start from one point and kill as much as they wanted. 5 minutes later, the unit furthest away from their destination set off. Then, the second unit, the third unit. Soon, Lung Song and political commissar Mo Chung, you also disappeared from the south gate. In less than 10 minutes, everything returned to normal. Only the night breeze could be heard. At this time, Wulong City was shrouded in darkness and silence. It was already past 12 o'clock. Those who wanted to sleep had already gone to sleep. Those who wanted to play had already found a place to bury their souls. Everything seemed to be the same as usual until the sound of swords clashing could be heard on the street, breaking the silence of the street. They were the 100 soldiers guarding the south gate. Because they had lost all their money in gambling, they had no choice but to leave early. Unfortunately, they bumped into a group of mercenaries who were rushing towards their destination on the street. The two sides suddenly met on the street. On one side, there were 100 gamblers who had lost all their money. On the other side, there were 400 auxiliary soldiers. After the two sides looked at each other, a short battle began. The 100 Siamese soldiers who did not bring any weapons were the ones being slaughtered. However, they still screamed before they died. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In the silence of the night, the screams spread far and wide. It also attracted the attention of the nearby residents. The commotion was getting louder and louder. Battalion commander, what should we do? A company commander stabbed the last Siamese soldier to death on the ground with a bayonet. He turned around and asked the battalion commander, "Don't think too much about it. Go to the rendezvous point as fast as you can." The auxiliary battalion commander secretly cursed his bad luck, but he didn't panic. This was just a warm-up before the big battle. The team of 400 people quickly left. When the people nearby came out to take a look, they saw the ground full of corpses and the smell of blood. Ah! Someone screamed first. Then similar screams came one after another. The commotion spread far and wide. Finally, the people on the other side of the street were alerted. Then, the Siamese soldiers in the city also received the news. The hour hand was approaching 12:50. There were still 10 minutes before the general attack. Except for a few small teams that were further away from the destination, most of the soldiers had already arrived at the designated location. However, the streets were already bustling with activity. The death of more than 100 Siamese soldiers was definitely a big case, and it attracted the attention of many people. Many Siamese captains, chiliarchs, and centurions who received the news were rushing over with their men. Even at this moment, they still didn't think that they were in danger. They just thought that some fugitive and his subordinates had bumped into each other and got into a fight. The hour hand kept moving. Finally, it pointed to the final destination. 1 o'clock in the morning. Send the signal. Attack. Commander Lung Song's voice trembled. He was excited. As soon as he finished speaking, a bright red signal flare rose into the sky and lit up the sky, following which gunshots and grenades rang out all over the city. The all-out attack had begun. At this moment, Wulong City had turned into a city of fire. Flames shot out in all directions. Incessant and endless, the power of the Type 95 and the Type 81 assault rifle formed an impenetrable fire net. All the Siamese soldiers in front of them became live targets. Whenever the soldiers gathered together to form a dense charge, a series of grenades would end their lives. Their bodies were thrown high into the air before they fell heavily to the ground. Any Siamese who walked on the streets, whether they were generals or soldiers, armed or ordinary civilians, became targets for the mercenaries. They were like food in the eyes of a beast. They were constantly bitten and devoured. They died or were injured. There were gunshots everywhere, and enemies were everywhere. It gave people a feeling that there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to hide. It seemed that at this moment, no place was safe. No place was heaven. Charge! Charge out! Report this to General Gordon. We must charge out. The 5 captains of the Siamese army in the city shouted at the top of their lungs. It seemed that if they didn't do this, they would lose all hope. Retreat. Retreat to the south gate. After an hour of continuous gunshots, the Siamese soldiers gradually came to their senses. After a few consecutive charges and countless deaths, they finally understood how terrifying their opponents were. At this moment, no one was thinking about fighting with the enemy who had entered the city. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to retreat. They had to escape and leave this hell on earth. Gunshots were heard intermittently throughout the night. When the sky finally brightened, the streets were littered with corpses. From time to time, among the crowds, there were survivors who were injured and wailing. Many places in the city were on fire. The places where food and weapons were stored were severely damaged. Even when the sky brightened, the fire showed no signs of stopping. It was still burning fiercely. The mercenaries had retreated, leaving behind a city full of corpses and injured soldiers. According to the statistics, more than 60,000 soldiers and civilians of Siam were killed or injured in this battle. At least half of them were burned by the fire and trampled to death. In fact, only about 10,000 people died in the hands of the mercenaries. The warehouse was burned. Apart from the corpses and the injured soldiers who could not be moved, there was no one left in the city. The scariest thing about this battle was that they didn't know who did it, and they didn't know how many enemies there were. They only knew from the survivors' descriptions that there should be a lot of enemies, and they seemed to be everywhere. Moreover, they all had very powerful rifles in their hands, and they even suspected that the other side had cannons. Otherwise, why would there be the sound of explosions from time to time? It was unknown whether outsiders believed in such a statement, but the people living in Wulong City firmly believed in it. because on this night, at least half of the 100,000 people were affected. Their families and friends were either killed or injured. Out of the 50,000 Siamese soldiers, more than 10,000 were killed and 10,000 were injured. The remaining 30,000 soldiers were lucky enough to escape. They did not dare to stay in the vicinity. Instead, they went straight to Kongjing City, which was south of Wulong City. From afar, the 30,000 soldiers looked like a group of homeless people. They wore tattered uniforms, their eyes were lifeless, and their morale was low. Most of them did not even know where their weapons were when they escaped. At this moment, who would dare to believe that this was an army with level 3 combat power? Were they supposed to be the elite soldiers of Siam? In a dense forest about 10 miles south of Wulong City, Lung Song was leading his army to reorganize themselves. After a night of battle, they had achieved their goal. Especially after burning the enemy's military supplies and provisions, General Gordon had no choice but to retreat. How is it? How is the count of the casualties? Although Lung Song also felt a little tired, as a commander, he naturally couldn't just fall asleep like ordinary soldiers. There was still too much work for him to do. He needed to preside over and make decisions. Commander, Lung Fong has returned. There are only 2 injured soldiers. However, it is not a big problem. They just need to rest for a while to recover their combat power. 7 auxiliary soldiers died, and 200 were injured. 3 of them were seriously injured. The rest only had light injuries. Chapter 620. Below Wanxiang City, there was a short period of peace after the battle. The power of the landmines had frightened General Gordon. He was not prepared to launch any more attacks before the Han civilians from the rear were sent up. Since he was the one attacking the city, he had the initiative. Furthermore, Wulong City had already prepared food for the army. There would not be any problems defending the city for a few months. Since there was no need to go to war for the time being, General Gordon summoned the singers who followed the army and held a party in his tent. He also called his generals and General Fan Yuhai to enjoy the joy of the interlude between wars. 8 young women with great figures were dressed in faintly discernible gauze. Their waists were swaying in the tent. Gordon and the other generals sat around them and laughed from time to time. Their gazes followed the movements of the women as they enjoyed the feast that was brought to their eyes. Gordon, who was sitting at the front, had already set his goal of warming the bed tonight. He wanted to fight for 300 rounds to get rid of the bad luck on his body. Just as he was indulging in his fantasies, a bodyguard quietly entered the tent with an ugly expression. He walked to his ear and whispered in a low voice, "What?" Suddenly, Gordon's face turned red, and the wine cup in his hand flew out with a bang. This movement attracted the attention of the other generals, and the 8 women screamed in shock. "Scream, scream, what are you screaming for? Get out of here." Gordon waved his hand. At this moment, his eyes were filled with a strong, murderous aura. It was as if he would kill anyone who dared to appear in front of him and offend him. The 8 singers hurriedly left the tent, leaving behind only a few generals in the tent. Fan Yuhai raised his eyebrows and then frowned deeply. He had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. "General, what happened?" A captain who was Gordon's absolute confidant asked in confusion. "Something happened. Wulong City was invaded last night. Our 50,000-strong army was defeated and was forced to retreat to the south. Our rations and weapons in the city were all burned. Damn it." First, he used a calm voice to report what he had just heard. Then, killing intent burst out from his eyes. It was as though he wanted to materialize a saber light to kill someone. There was silence in the tent as everyone digested Gordon's words. However, very soon, a general said in disbelief, That's impossible. We are right here. The 4 gates of Wanxiang City are tightly shut. It's impossible for them to send an army to surround us. That's right. The Lao's army won't go around us. The armies of other countries are all our allies. They won't attack us secretly. Could it be the work of mercenaries? But how did they get behind us? Could it be that they fell from the sky? We launched the first attack 2 days ago, and those people took action at night. That's too fast. Even if they are mercenaries, it's impossible for them to send out their troops in such a short time. They must have bypassed us to attack. There are 50,000 of our soldiers in the city. Even if they are mercenaries, they won't be able to occupy the entire Wulong city if they don't have enough soldiers. It's even more impossible for them to inflict heavy damage on our army. Could it be the work of other countries? The generals below spoke one after another. They mentioned various possibilities, but they were all rejected one by one. Godin's face darkened. He didn't speak. According to the battle report, the people who came were armed with advanced firearms, so they should be mercenaries. However, the battle report didn't mention the number of soldiers. What did that mean? Did they forget to mention it? That was impossible. There could only be one answer. They still didn't know how many enemies there were. Half of the 50,000-strong army was blasted out of Wulong City. They didn't even know how many enemies there were. How terrifying was that? Didn't that mean that the enemy had a lot of soldiers? However, wasn't the main force of the mercenaries taken away by the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty to attack the Phnom Penh dynasty? Where did the enemy come from? Godin was deep in thought. The generals were also deep in thought. Even Fan Yuhai was deep in thought. The only difference was that Fan Yuhai had locked the enemy on the mercenaries even though he didn't get any accurate information. In his eyes, he was very clear about the military strength of the surrounding countries. Only the mercenaries could break into the city and defeat the 50,000 strong Siamese soldiers in one night. However, how did they appear there? After all, they had only appeared at Wanxiang City 2 days ago and launched their first attack. How could the mercenaries react so quickly? The entire battle took less than 5 days. Even a flying man couldn't have done it, unless, when he thought of the only possibility, Fan Yuhai's expression changed drastically. Could it be that the mercenaries were already prepared and knew that they would attack Wanxiang City? Hence, they planted a large number of soldiers behind them. If that was the case, once the Siamese army launched their attack, the mercenaries started their attack on Wulong City? Yes, that must be it. If all of this was true, the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty was too good at scheming. His attacks were ruthless, and the military strength behind him was much stronger than what was shown. He even had the ability to split his troops to attack Siamese and the Phnom Penh dynasty. No, it should be more than that. Since he had arranged a backup plan in Siamese, his other ally, the Kingdom of Ava, must have also arranged a backup plan. Hiss! Fan Yuhai sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly felt that Yang Chendong was very terrifying. This person was not only good at calculation, but also had a more outstanding military vision than ordinary people. He also had powerful firearms and an unknown military strength. How could such an opponent be defeated? Question marks flashed in his mind. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly had an idea. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. He had repeatedly challenged the mercenaries and Yang Chendong. First, he led the Lansong kingdom into the whirlpool of war. Then, the Lansong kingdom was destroyed. Then, he had the idea of forming an alliance between the 3 countries. However, now that the Phnom Penh dynasty and Siamese kingdom had been attacked to different degrees, as the initiator, how could he not be targeted by Yang Chendong? if Yang Qindong really wanted to deal with him, would he be able to stay safe with his 5,000 elite cavalry? No, such a person was too dangerous. He had to leave this place first, at least before he had enough strength. He would not appear in front of Yang Qindong. When he appeared again, he had to make all the necessary preparations. After making up his mind, Fan Yuhai did not speak anymore. He did not even have the intention to help General Gordon analyze the situation. He kept his mouth shut. "General, I don't think it's the time to talk about this. Even if Wulong City's provisions have been burned, we have to be prepared to leave this place. Otherwise, if the enemy behind us and the enemy in Wanxiang City attack us from both sides, how are we going to face them? Besides, if the army loses its provisions, it will definitely cause chaos. We have to leave this place quickly while the soldiers below are still unaware. We have to gather new provisions for the next battle," one of the generals said after analyzing the gains and losses. The other generals nodded in agreement. "That's right, General. We have to retreat. Yes, we have to leave. We can't let them attack us from both sides." Gordon slammed the table and said. Then he looked around and fixed his gaze on Fan Yuhai. "General Fan, what do you think?" Fan Yuhai wanted to say, "If we leave now, aren't you afraid that the mercenaries will attack us halfway?" However, he thought that if he reminded Gordon, he would definitely hold his ground. Who knew what the mercenaries would do? If they were really attacked from both sides, wouldn't it be very dangerous for him and Gordon to stay together? Since that was the case, it was better to let them leave. At that time, whether or not they were attacked by the mercenaries, they would escape halfway. At least he would be safe. The world was big, but he was the most important. Fan Yuhai nodded. "It's time to leave. How about this? I will bring my 5,000 cavalrymen and retreat last, just in case. Speaking of which, my cavalrymen were not of much use in this siege. I feel ashamed." He wanted to hear Fan Yuhai's opinion, but he did not expect him to take the initiative to bring up the rear. This made Gordon's eyes brighten. He sighed and said, "General Fan is a righteous man. Thank you for your hard work. Don't worry, if the mercenaries catch up from behind, you only have to hold them off for a while. I will send reinforcements to support you." "Okay, thank you." Fan Yuhai stood up and cupped his fist with a sincere face. However, he thought coldly in his heart, "Who would believe that you would come to my aid when I am attacked?" With someone bringing up the rear, it was much easier to retreat. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, Gordon decided on the spot to retreat now. They would rush through the night and try to reach Wulong City the day after tomorrow. At that time, they would guard the city tightly and ask the king for rations so that they could regroup and fight again. With all the generals present, there was no need for a meeting. Soon, the order was given and the generals went to prepare. After 2 hours, the army had already packed up their tents and started to retreat towards Wulong City. Then, the rest of the army followed suit and left Wanxiang City in a long line. On the tower in the south of Wanxiang City, General He Guang was looking at the scene before him through a pair of binoculars. Because of the landmines, Wan Shaoqian did not stay on the tower. There were too many things in the city that he needed to deal with, so he left everything here to He Guang. Because of this, he was also confused when he saw that the enemy had actually started to retreat. Chapter 6:21. He raised his binoculars again and again to make sure that he was not mistaken. The enemy had indeed retreated. He quickly said to the messenger beside him, "Go and inform Governor Luan that the situation has changed. Ask him to come here as soon as possible." Half an hour later, Wan Shaoqian arrived at the gate tower on his bicycle. When he arrived at the gate tower, he listened to He Guang's report and raised his binoculars as well. He saw the Siamese army retreating. How long have they been doing this? Yuan Shaoqian put down his binoculars and was puzzled, reporting to the governor, "They have been retreating since half an hour ago. I have calculated that the number of retreating soldiers has exceeded 10,000, and it seems like they will continue to retreat," He Guang reported with a face full of doubts. "So, they have really retreated? But why?" Yuan Shaoqian could not figure it out and frowned. I don't know," He Guang answered honestly. He wanted to ask Governor Luan why. He Guang knew that it would be useless to ask He Guang. He thought for a moment and said to the messenger beside him, "Turn on the radio immediately and contact the 6th young master. Report the situation here as it is." The waiting time was always long. On the open land 5 miles away from the gate tower, the Siamese army was still retreating. Just from the looks of it, they should be serious. However, this was even more puzzling. The attack was only temporarily blocked, and only a few thousand of the 100,000 soldiers died. Why did they stop fighting? The morale of this army was too low. "Sir, the 6th young master has called back." The messenger ran all the way to Yuan Shaoqian and handed him a telegram. Yuan Shaoqian, who was puzzled, quickly picked up the telegram. After a few glances, he could not help but shout excitedly, "Good, good. Ha, ha." He Guang, who was beside him, was even more confused. "Governor Luan, what did the 6th young master say?" "Here, take a look at it yourself." Yuan Shaoqian was in a good mood at that moment, so he casually handed the telegram to He Guang. After reading it once, her eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't help but read it again. Then, with a surprised look on her face, she said, "The 6th young master said that the mercenaries attacked Wulong City and defeated the 50,000 Siamese soldiers there. They even burned the enemy's provisions. This is too powerful, but where did the mercenaries come from?" Yuan Shaoqian also couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't show it in front of his subordinates. As a superior, it was appropriate for him to remain mysterious in front of his subordinates. Thus he chuckled and said, "This is not something you should consider. You only need to know that Wanxiang City is safe." Yes, He Guang also knew that he couldn't be fully trusted by the mercenaries right now. There were some things that he couldn't ask casually. If both sides were to fight fair and square, he would lose because his skills were not as good as his opponent, and there would be nothing to say. However, the mercenaries were simply playing tricks on him. They were either relying on the advantage of firearms, mines, or other weapons, or ambushing him. This made him feel powerless, as if he had punched cotton with all his might. Initially, he was still proud of his long snake formation, and even thought that it would be best if the mercenaries appeared. This way, he would be able to counterattack and win. However, after being ambushed, he realized how wishful his thinking was. He knew to disperse his army, but did the mercenaries not know? Now, it was not just one spot that was attacked, but the entire army. How was he going to break through? The surroundings were pitch black, and all the torches were extinguished. Regardless of whether they were attacked or not, all of the 1,000-men soldiers were lying on the ground. It was as if this was the only way to ensure their safety and survive. Bastard counterattack. What's the use of extinguishing the torches? Are you waiting for death? Although he was in a sorry state, and in order to save his life, he had to block more than one bodyguard in front of him. However, this did not stop him from reprimanding others and sending them to their deaths. "Pass down my order, counterattack. There can't be too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiding and would take advantage of the situation to charge over. Quick, counterattack. I'll kill anyone who doesn't counterattack." Gordon's yelling was heard in the darkness. His yelling was extremely clear in such a quiet atmosphere, and it made many Kiliarch's expressions turn ugly. If they attacked, they might die, but if they didn't attack, they would die too. Thinking that dying in battle would be considered a sacrifice for the country, and at least their families would be safe, some of the Kiliarchs had no choice but to yell at their subordinates. Everyone, stand up and charge forward. The enemy is in the dense forest. As long as we charge forward, they won't have any advantage in close combat. I'll kill anyone who doesn't charge. The Kiliarchs did not forget to say the last sentence. Previously, they were still cursing Gordon for bullying the weak, but now that they thought about it, wasn't it the same for them? After the generals gave their orders, the soldiers were the ones who suffered the most. They did not have the ability to bargain with the generals. Under the orders of the centurions and the supervision of the decharches and corporals, the soldiers at the lowest level were forced to stand up. Then, in groups, they began to approach the dense forest on the right side of the road. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about being bitten by mosquitoes, they would be standing at the edge of the forest right now. With a single gunshot, they would be able to rush over as quickly as possible and force the mercenaries to engage in close combat with them. But now, it was useless to say anything. In history, there was no such thing as if or if. Everything depended on strength and a trace of luck. The soldiers were forced to get up from the ground one by one and carefully walked towards the dense forest. It seemed as though there were mines buried under their feet. If they were not careful, they would be blown up into the sky by the powerful explosion. However, the attack they expected didn't happen. After walking forward for a distance of 50 meters, gunshots were still heard in front of them. It was as though everything that happened just now was a dream, an illusion. This change gave more people courage, and they stood up as well. Then, they groped their way through the darkness and headed towards the dense forest. Could it be that the enemy retreated after one wave of attacks? That must be it. Otherwise, the gunshots would have been heard long ago. It seems like there aren't too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given up such a good opportunity. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? Let's go. This is our chance to show off. The Siamese soldiers began to talk among themselves. Then their footsteps began to quicken and become lighter. It was as if the mosquito bites were no longer happening. Bam, 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 bam. Just when the Siamese soldiers thought that they were safe, a barrage of gunshots rang out again. This time, it was as loud as the first wave of attacks. The Siamese soldiers were caught off guard, especially those who were the fastest. They were the first to die. Like harvested wheat, they fell to the ground one after another. Even when they died, their eyes were still wide open, as though they couldn't understand what had happened. Chapter 6:23. Get down! One of the generals shouted. Immediately, the charging Siamese soldiers fell to the ground obediently. Their movements were so fast that it was as if they had practiced this countless times. Poor General Gordon had just stood up under the protection of his bodyguards when gunshots rang out. Once again, he was mercilessly pressed to the ground. He could not help but chew on a piece of mud in his mouth, which made him angry and ashamed at the same time. The sound of gunfire continued. From time to time, figures would rush out of the forest. Then, grenades would fall on the heads of the Siamese soldiers who were close to the forest. Retreat! Retreat! Crawl backward! Following the explosions, more and more soldiers fell to the ground. Some Kiliarchs hurriedly gave out orders. Then, a shocking scene happened. On the main road, countless people were frantically retreating. With this speed, even if they were the members of Cold Vanguard, some of them would probably pass the test. This should be the effect of potential. When a person was faced with death, he could always explode with unimaginable speed. As the Siamese soldiers retreated to their original positions, the gunshots and grenade explosions gradually stopped. Silence reigned over the land once again. Being tricked once wasn't something to be afraid of. A horse could stumble. However, if he were to fall for the same trick again and suffer a loss, then he would be considered stupid and would not learn from his mistakes. Hence, after this, even when Gordon's roar came from the darkness again, none of the Kiliarchs moved, with the mentality that the law could not punish the majority. If no one moved, could it be that your brother, the great general, would kill all of us Kiliarchs? If he really did that, it would not be long before a mutiny broke out. After shouting so many times that his voice was almost hoarse, the army did not move at all. Gordon gave up shouting. Forget it, forget it. He would just wait like this. Once the sun rose, and everyone could see their opponents clearly, it would be time for him to counterattack. He did not believe that he would lose again at that time. This scene was similar to when Chen Bo dealt with the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang kingdom. They were also forced to lie on the ground to ensure their safety. The only difference was that the terrain this time was not good. Lung Song had limited manpower and could not capture the 100,000 soldiers again. Pass down the order. The auxiliary soldiers will retreat first. The cold front will be the last to retreat. After dawn, gather at Wanxiang City. Lung Song gave the order reluctantly. He thought that he could fight a good battle, but he was helpless against these cowards. After all, he couldn't let the army charge forward. Firstly, their line of sight would be obstructed, and secondly, their forces were too few. If they really charged forward and engaged in close combat, they would be the ones to suffer. This was an outcome that he absolutely did not want. The mercenaries began to retreat into the depths of the forest in an orderly manner. Then they turned and headed towards Wanxiang City. The Siamese soldiers on the road did not dare to guess or test the waters. This was because it would mean sacrificing countless lives. No one wanted to die, so they might as well stay where they were. The cold wind blew past them from time to time. Mosquitoes would also take the opportunity to bite them. The Siamese soldiers could only endure and curse in their hearts. They cursed the mercenaries for targeting them. They cursed their general for being useless. What kind of war was this? Time passed slowly, and the sky gradually brightened. The dew fell, and the mosquitoes were also affected by it. They began to leave one by one. When the white fog dissipated, the Siamese soldiers finally launched their counterattack. They rushed into the forest as if they wanted to perform well. However, what awaited them was no one. Even the cold front, who were the last to retreat, had all retreated an hour ago. Under the protection of his bodyguards, Gordon stood up straight again. However, his eyes were red, indicating that he did not rest well last night. General, the enemy is no longer in the forest. What should we do next? All of the major commanders and Kiliarchs began to gather around this general before asking questions with fawning expressions on their faces. After all, they had shown their fearful side last night. Now, they were afraid that their general would settle the score with them. Gordon wanted to settle the score with them. However, if he really dealt with these generals, who would lead the army? If these generals gathered together, they might even turn against him. He could only remember this incident in his heart. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "What else can we do? Continue to retreat. Let the army speed up and rush to Wulong City for breakfast." He could not deal with these generals, but he could still do something. Punishing them for not eating breakfast was a temporary way to vent his anger. Of course, this was also because Gordon wanted to rush back to the city as soon as possible. Once he entered the city, he would be much safer. After this battle, the Siamese army lost another 10,000 soldiers. With less than 90,000 soldiers and 10,000 injured soldiers, the Siamese army finally returned to Wulong City in the evening of the next day. When he entered the city, He saw the destroyed streets and houses. There were even some fireworks that had not been completely extinguished. Gordon knew that this base was finished. It would take at least a few months to rebuild it. This meant that the plan to attack Wanxiang City would have to be abandoned halfway. He would have to return to the capital with shame. Lung Song naturally did not care about what Gordon was thinking. 2 battles, 2 victories. More than 4,000 soldiers wiped out tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. Most importantly, he did not suffer any losses. This result was satisfactory. With a face full of excitement, he arrived at Wanxiang City. Wan Shaoqian had already received the news and was waiting for these heroes with a group of people. What was different from when Gudan entered Wulong City was that good wine and tea had already been prepared. Everyone had a joyful expression on their faces. Wanxiang City was safe. As the governor, Wan Shaoqian was naturally the happiest person. Although he was not afraid of war, he knew that once a battle broke out, the order in the city that had just gotten back on track would be destroyed. He did not know how much he would have to pay to get back on track. Fortunately, the 6th young master had calculated everything. The retreat of the Siamese army was a reality. With the 4,000 soldiers led by Lung Song, even if the enemy attacked again, they would not have to be afraid. With the advantage of weapons, Gordon would definitely return empty-handed. After Lung Song's troops returned to the city, another piece of good news was sent over via telegram. Just yesterday, the Awol dynasty also sent out 50,000 soldiers. However, they were quickly met by the Vietnamese mercenaries Hong Jin and Wan Jianqing's 20,000 men at the strategic town of Pangang Valley in the northwest of Laos. There was no chance for the Awa dynasty to launch a surprise attack, so they happily withdrew their troops. Just like that, Siam and Awa's attacks were disrupted. The people of Laos finally did not have to live in fear anymore. They could continue doing what they were supposed to do. When the news of Laos reached Yang Chendong's ears, the 6th young master at Suing City heaved a sigh of relief. Although all of this was within his expectations, no one could guarantee that there would be no accidents. Now that the dust had settled, he could finally relax and focus all his attention on Suing City. They still haven't sent anyone to negotiate with us. Yang Chendong placed his hands on his waist and stood in front of the temporary headquarters. He looked at the tall city in the distance and asked Tiger's Mane, "Young master, not yet. There's news from the Security Bureau. Leader Yun is still in the middle of an operation. He should be here soon." Tiger's Mane reported, "Good. Since that's the case, we'll increase the price. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. Give the order, fire with all your might. I want to see how long they can hold on." Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. Due to his own foundation, he did not have the intention to take down the Phnom Penh dynasty this time. The 4.5 million Han people in Suing City were in the process of being transformed, but the news was not ideal. These people were all refugees that the southern Ming dynasty had to abandon. They were uneducated and were born to hard labor. They were also timid, and all they wanted was to have a bite to eat and survive. For such people to change in a short period of time, to give them confidence and dignity, it was not something that could be done in a day. Although the political department and the publicity department had put in a lot of effort, it was impossible to use it without a year. In addition, they had to learn culture, at least to be able to read, which may take longer. When the 2 provinces of Vietnam and Laos were established, 200,000 educated youths in Suing City had been used. To take over the entire Phnom Penh dynasty, at least 100,000 educated youths were needed. This reserve was gone, and it would take time to train them again. This was Yang Chendong's difficulty. Without enough foundation, how could he build high-rise buildings? In the end, he decided that this time he would only fight against the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to show his muscles through this incident to ensure that no one would bully him in Vietnam or Laos when he was not here. The main reason that forced Yang Qindong to make this decision was not only the lack of educated youths, but also the emergence of an unexpected event. The honeymoon period between Ming and Wallace suddenly ended. The Security Bureau sent news that a war seemed inevitable. The reason turned out to be that Shi Biao, who was in charge of the security of the trade, blackmailed Walla merchants. The close relationship between the two sides suddenly became like fire and water. The residence of the right Prime Minister of Golden Rim City was located in a very prosperous area of the city. Two 2-meter-high stone lions stood in front of the gate day and night, showing the noble status of the owner of the house. In fact, in the Golden Bien dynasty, the right Prime Minister Dun did have a lot of power, second only to the king. He was on par with the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei, perhaps to deal with the rumors of discord between the two, or perhaps because King Palomo did not wish to see his subjects too united and thus threaten his own position. The two ministers had been arguing over various issues all this while. Sometimes the left minister would win, and sometimes the right minister would win. This time, facing the issue of whether to fight or to negotiate with the mercenaries, the two prime ministers had different opinions. The left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei was in favor of war, while the right Prime Minister Dun was in favor of peace. Under the leadership of the two of them, the court officials were naturally divided into two factions and followed their lead. Because the king had certain expectations for Siam and Ava, the current situation was that the left Prime Minister had a slight advantage, while the right Prime Minister was slightly passive. Today, after the court, the right Prime Minister Dun returned to his residence with an unhappy face. He went straight to the backyard. As if it had become a habit, Yunk liked to go to the backyard of some important ministers. It seemed to be safer there. This time, he was staying in the backyard of the right Prime Minister's residence. Duan arrived with a displeased expression. When he saw Skylark's seat resting on a recliner with his eyes closed, he couldn't help but complain even before he walked over. "Sir Yun, I can really sleep. Don't you know that we're about to send troops to Suwing City?" "Send troops?" Yunk, who was lying on the recliner, slowly opened his eyes. "Yes, the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei is leading more and more officials to suggest sending troops. I can't stop it. I think you should leave Golden Bien City quickly." Duche seemed to like to see Yunk's surprised look. From the moment this person appeared until now, he had been acting as if nothing had happened, which made him feel very displeased. No matter what, he was still the right minister of the country, with a high position and power. Yet, just because he had accepted 200,000 taels of silver from the other party, he had not only detained the other party at home, but he was also running around in the imperial court for the other party. Now that the situation was becoming more and more unfavorable, he had already decided to stop. As for the 200,000 taels of silver he received before, sorry, he had spent a lot of effort on this trip. Didn't he need to be compensated? Oh. Yunk blinked his eyes, then leaned his head back and began to rest again. Dun, who had turned his head and said this, was still waiting to see Yunk's panicked look. The other party might even beg him. If he was happy, it would not be a problem to accept some money from the other party to ensure his safety. If he was unhappy, then he would just wave his hand and drive him away. What a joke! Do you really think that mercenaries are the best in the world? Why don't you look at the situation outside? The mercenaries have become an existence that everyone wants to beat up. He turned his head to the side and waited for a few breaths of time, but there was no movement at all. Out of curiosity, he turned around to take a look and saw Yun Ke lying down with a satisfied and comfortable look on his face. He immediately became angry. "Mr. Yun, didn't you hear what I said just now?" I'll tell you, without waiting for him to explain the seriousness of the matter, a piece of white paper with words written on it appeared in front of him. The other end of the paper was gently held by Yunk. What is this? His face was filled with doubt. Could this be the banknote that the other party gave him to save his life? But it didn't seem like it. With curiosity in his heart, Dunn still reached out to take it. He wanted to see what the other party was up to, if he still dared to play tricks with him. Then he would definitely let the other party know that he, the horse lord, also had 3 eyes. He took the paper and found that it was indeed not a banknote. There were only a few lines of words written on it. Out of instinct, he looked at the words one by one. Along with it, his originally condescending and arrogant expression also changed. After reading it for the first time, his arrogant expression had already disappeared. After reading it for the second time, cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. After reading it for the third time, the way he looked at Yunk had completely changed. Previously, it was a condescending look, but now it was filled with great shock and even a hint of flattery. Mr. Yunk, where did this come from? Are you joking? Slowly opening his eyes, Skylark chuckled. Joking? Do you think I would joke about this with the right Prime Minister? Let me tell you, this is the battle report I just received. It's 100% accurate. How about it? You should know what will happen next, right? At this time, Yunk was very certain and was full of confidence. People said that a weak country had no diplomacy, and diplomacy could be divided into several types. For example, their infiltration work was also a diplomatic method. Yunk was very capable, but first, he still needed a platform that could give him a chance to perform. The mercenaries were getting stronger step by step, and winning every battle was a platform for him to perform. It was with this guarantee that he could carry out his work like a fish in water. He could use all his methods and perform wonderful infiltration battles. This time, the mercenaries did not let him down. When everyone thought that they would suffer heavy losses and even lose their status, who would have thought that under the command and planning of the 6th young master, the scales of victory would lean towards him again? Yunk was still lying there, and he didn't even have the intention to get up. But now, Dunn didn't mean to blame him, or he couldn't care less about it. He was standing there and constantly wiping his cold sweat, thinking about the situation that the Gilded Dynasty would face next. What was written on the paper was the situation at the front line. It was sent to Skylark by wireless telegram. It clearly recorded the defeat of the Siamese army and the failure of the Awa army. They had no choice but to retreat. What was written on it was what the Gilded Dynasty relied on before. If what was written on it was true, then the Gilded Dynasty would have no reinforcements, and the whole country would be in danger. As the right Prime Minister of a country, Dunn naturally knew what this meant. In the worst-case scenario, the mercenaries would be like beasts coming out of the mountains. They could open their bloody mouths and bite the Gilded Dynasty at will. If they wanted to, it was not impossible for them to bite the Gilded Dynasty to death. Thinking of such a result, and thinking that His Majesty wanted to continue to send more troops to Suing City, wasn't that tantamount to angering the mercenaries? At that time, there would be no need for peace talks. They would just fight until one side was crippled. But no matter how he looked at it, it seemed that only the Gilded Dynasty would be crippled. Dunn's face changed again and again. At this moment, his mind was spinning rapidly. He slowly came up with an idea. That was to take the initiative to ask for peace before the other side sent out troops. A slap would never hit a smiling face. As long as their posture was humble, it was still possible to negotiate successfully. After all, the army of the Goldenbian dynasty had not been completely damaged. They still had the power to fight back. Once the other two allies saw that they were resisting desperately, they might send troops for the second time. Chapter 6:25. The opportunity was right in front of him. Duan, who had made up his mind, no longer had that mocking expression on his face. Instead, he put on a flattering smile and took half a step forward. Suryun, can you open your eyes and tell this Prime Minister what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has in mind? After all, we are now neighboring countries. It's better not to hurt our relationship. Dun took the initiative to lower his head. Yunk was not surprised by this. If there were still people who wanted to start a war with the mercenaries after receiving this information, they would either have already given up on life and death, or they would have other ideas. He could not help but sigh in his heart. The sixth young master also sent a telegram, saying that they could agree to the peace talks, but they had to try their best to obtain benefits. This time, Yang Qindong did not act like he did with the Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms. He did not send troops to destroy the kingdoms. In the end, it was not that he had become merciful or that his ambition had been satisfied. On the contrary, everything was done for the sake of the overall situation, without enough resources and manpower. Even if they sent troops to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty, they would only be picking up a mess. Not to mention, if they really fought, the price they would have to pay would be too high. No one could guarantee that Siam and Ava would not send reinforcements again. The mercenaries did not want to face such a situation before they were fully prepared. With the idea of mutual destruction, no one knew what kind of power these two kingdoms would erupt in the face of a life and death crisis. Once their armies really entered the Vietnamese and Laos provinces, the losses would be immeasurable. Without sufficient preparation, Yang Qindong did not want to face this situation. Because of this, Yunk still had a lot of work to do. Otherwise, he would have already laid his cards on the table with Dwayne. It was either death or surrender, and he would have just made a decision. After sighing in his heart, Skylark finally stood up from the reclining chair and stood in front of Dwayne. Right, Prime Minister, this time it was you who provoked the mercenaries first, and then we sent out our troops. Even if we were to send out our troops, we would inform you beforehand that you would have to give us a definite answer after the emissary returned to Wanxiang City. And it's precisely because of your arrogance and rudeness that we're meeting on the battlefield, isn't it? Yes, yes. Ducie lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong and nodded repeatedly. Some people said that this time it was the mercenaries who started the war without declaring war, but that was not the case. Everything was just as Yunk had said. The emissary from Laos had given them a chance, but no one had taken it seriously at that time. That was why Shangding City was suddenly breached and Jujing City's 100,000 soldiers were defeated. All right, since Right Chief Minister has already admitted that it was your fault this time, then whether my mercenary army will fight or shake hands with you will depend on your performance and what you are willing to pay. In short, this time, don't take my words seriously. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy medicine for regret anywhere. All right, I'll wait for you here. You can also go and verify the authenticity of the information. In fact, there's no need to verify it. Your scouts should be able to send the news back in 2 days. But if you haven't made a decision by then, my mercenary army will take the initiative to make the decision for you. No. Duan kept shaking his head. Previously, because he had placed his hopes on the allies of the two countries, he wanted to send troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries. Since he knew that his allies had been defeated or had retreated, it was very clear what to do. Duan's attitude was arrogant and even a little arrogant. But when he left, he bowed with every step like a child seeking advice from a teacher. He was extremely respectful. After finally leaving the backyard, Duan's expression returned to its serious state. Men, prepare a sedan. I want to enter the palace to see His Majesty, it was not that Duan didn't doubt the authenticity of the information provided by Yunk, but Yunk had already made it clear that he would not wander around and would wait here, and the news would be confirmed in 2 days. Did this person eat a bear's heart and leopard's guts to joke about such a matter? If everything was true, then it was necessary for him to report the situation to the king. It was better to be prepared than to not know anything at all. In the king's palace, Duan stood in the side hall. Opposite him sat King Boromir. Boromir was a little fat, and he was wearing a golden royal robe. He narrowed his eyes. "Right, Prime Minister, I have thought about it. The left Prime Minister's words are not unreasonable. Since Siam and Ava have already sent news, they will definitely send troops. As allies, we should also send more troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries." Boromir was very clear about the reason why Duan wanted to see him. In the morning, the 2 prime ministers had been arguing in the court. In the end, Duan's faction became weaker, and even he, the king, leaned towards Dingdingwei's opinion and continued to send reinforcements. Boromir did not understand why Duan wanted to see him. Could it be that he wanted to continue persuading him? "Your Majesty, this is the information I received. Please take a look." Duan did not explain anything. He only presented the information he received from Yunk. He believed that once the king saw this, his attitude would change drastically. "You just received this information?" Boromir looked at Duan with a puzzled gaze. The right prime minister did not have the authority to gather information. So where did he get this information from? Puzzled, Boromir took the paper with the words written on it from the eunuch beside him. After looking at it casually, his eyes widened and his body began to tremble. In the end, even his hands that were holding the paper were trembling. "Right, Prime Minister, where did you get this information? Why didn't I know about it?" Boromir suddenly raised his head and looked at Duan with a terrifying gaze. "Your Majesty, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. I only saw it when I returned to my residence." Duan naturally would not reveal that Yunk was in his residence. Who knew if the king would accuse him of colluding with the enemy in a fit of anger? Besides, he was counting on his relationship with Yunk to gain more benefits in the future. He had to hide this person well. A merchant from Laos? Boromir was not very satisfied with this answer. He wanted to ask why such a merchant did not look for him or any other officials but the right prime minister. But before Boromir could ask, Duan took the initiative to explain. "Your Majesty, my butler said that the Laos merchant will come looking for me again. But, in my opinion, this is not important. What is important is whether the information is true or not. If it is, what should we do next?" Right, according to the right Prime Minister. "Is this news true?" Boromir seemed to have woken up the person in his dream. Boromir's voice carried a hint of urgency as he asked. In fact, it did not matter how the information came about. The most important thing was whether it was true or not. If it's true, it's a big mistake to send troops to the front. What's wrong? The other 2 allies have retreated. Do you want to fight head-on with the mercenaries with the Golden Border Dynasty's powerful army? This, in my opinion, regardless of whether it is true or not, there is no smoke without fire. We have to prepare for a backup plan. Duan raised his head. He wanted to say that since he was the one who sent the information, of course, he would believe it to be true. But he would not say that. He wanted the king to figure it out himself. At the same time, he wanted to use this as an excuse to trick some people, so he could not be too sure. Yes, it is necessary to prepare for a backup plan. Boromir kept nodding, but soon he shook his head. But we have to be careful. Someone might be deliberately spreading false information to mislead us. So, summon the left prime minister to the palace for a meeting. In the end, Boromir did not make a decision. He wanted to summon the others to listen to their opinions. When he heard that the king wanted to summon the left prime minister, Duan's eyes flashed with excitement. He knew the king too well. The king liked to listen to everyone's opinions, as if that was the best way to make the right choice. But he had forgotten that the truth was often in the hands of only a few people. The king summoned the left prime minister. Ding Ding Wei, in his official robe, appeared in the side hall. Ding Ding Wei was tall and slender. He looked to be in his 50s. His eyes were not big, but they were very spirited and gave people a feeling of wisdom. Your subject greets your majesty. When he entered the side hall, Ding Ding Wei bowed to the king according to the rules. Left Prime Minister, please rise. Come, bring this over. When Ding Ding Wei entered the hall, Boromir's expression had already returned to normal. He looked calm and relaxed. Obviously, he wanted to see the debate between the two prime ministers before making a decision. With the demeanor of a prime minister, Ding Ding Wei unhurriedly took the paper that the eunuch presented to him. First, he gave it a cursory glance. His eyes immediately widened. Then, he carefully read it twice. After that, he did not immediately speak. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. King Boromir was not in a hurry. He seemed to be used to the left prime minister's way of doing things. He sat there calmly and did not say anything. On the other side, Duan was also not in a hurry. This was a trap to begin with. He had even thought about what choice Ding Ding Wei would make. He was just waiting for him to jump in. After about 5 or 6 breaths, Ding Ding Wei finally opened his eyes. He cupped his fists and said to Boromir, "Your Majesty, may I know where this information came from?" Chapter 626. For the left prime minister to say this, it was clear that he did not believe that this was news from the army. He knew very well that regarding the movements of the other 2 countries, it would take at least the day after tomorrow for definite news to arrive. Now that it had arrived, it could only mean that this news did not come from official channels. The left prime minister is indeed amazing. This news didn't come from the military. It was sent by the right prime minister. Boromir seemed to be very satisfied with the left prime minister's performance and didn't forget to praise him. The right prime minister sent it? Ding Ding Wei laughed. Originally, he was suspicious of this news because they were enemies with the mercenaries. Of course, he had done his research on the strength of the mercenaries. In his opinion, although the mercenaries were powerful, their weakness was also very obvious. They were too few in number. They might be able to deal with any one country, but if it was 1 against 3, they wouldn't be able to do it. But now, the news said that the armies of Siam and Ava had sent out their troops and were defeated. It seemed too unreal. This was already suspicious. Now that he knew that the news came from the right prime minister, Ding Ding Wei instinctively thought that it was fake news. As for why this news came, it was very simple. It was because Dun wanted to prevent him from sending reinforcements to the front line. Because the 2 of them had different political views, once the reinforcements were sent, it meant that the other side had lost the battle. Oh, why is the left prime minister laughing? No one knew what Boromir was thinking when he said this. But from his words, it was clear that he was a person who wasn't afraid of things getting out of hand. Your Majesty, please forgive me for being rude. Now, I would like to ask the right prime minister a few questions. Is that all right? Ding Ding Wei still smiled and asked Boromir for permission. I believe the right prime minister won't mind, right? Boromir nodded with a smile. This was equivalent to agreeing on behalf of Dun. Of course. The confident Dun nodded reservedly. Then he looked at Ding Ding Wei and said, "If the left prime minister has any questions, feel free to ask. I will answer truthfully." At this moment, Dun's expression was very calm. There was even a hint of confidence on his face. When Ding Dingwei saw all of this, for some reason, his heart couldn't help but tremble. As an old rival, he knew all too well what kind of person Duan was. For the sake of fighting for power and profit, they would do anything. Such people were often willing to turn black into white. They could be said to have mastered the art of thick black. Because of this person had done too many things that made people feel guilty. It was difficult to describe him as confident, but now he was actually so calm. At this moment, Boromov and Ding Dingwei were shocked by Duan's words. This was a scene that they hadn't expected at all. Originally, after hearing Ding Dingwei's words, Boromov could basically confirm that this was a fake information that Duan had deliberately created to delay the sending of reinforcements. He was still a little angry about this. He could allow the two prime ministers to fight each other, but the prerequisite was that they couldn't disrupt the development of the country. Otherwise, he wouldn't hesitate to chop off their heads. But suddenly, Duan was so confident that he would use his authority as a stake. At this moment, Boromov hesitated. Boromov wasn't the only one who thought so. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei was also caught off guard by Duan's move. What's going on? It's just a plan to delay the arrival of reinforcements. Why did he make such a huge bet? Why did the right Prime Minister dare to make such a huge bet? What did he rely on? Ding Dingwei looked at Dun seriously, but he couldn't see anything from Dun's face. Especially at this moment, Dun intentionally closed his eyes. This made Ding Dingwei feel that he didn't know where to start and analyze. The side hall fell silent. Both the king and the left prime minister were shocked by Duan's bold words. They couldn't help but wonder if they were wrong. Duan opened his eyes and said, "If this information is true, not only should we stop sending reinforcements, but we should also find a way to negotiate with the mercenaries. The sooner we negotiate, the more sincere we will be, and the less we will have to pay. On the other hand, when the situation is settled, we will have to pay several times the price if we want to negotiate with them." Duan's words couldn't be more apt to describe him now. Duan's words were completely for the sake of the Golden Border dynasty and had nothing to do with any power struggle. This, King Boromir, was indeed frightened by Duan's boldness. He couldn't help but hesitate, but before he could say anything, left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei also opened his mouth and said in the same shocking tone, "I think this news is fake. Although the mercenaries are powerful, their military strength is limited. It is impossible for them to stop the armies of Siam and Ava at the same time. This is the right time to send reinforcements. I am also willing to guarantee that if I am wrong, I will retire and return to my hometown." Well, Tintinway had also put in a lot of effort. His words were so certain that Boromir was in a dilemma. Normally, such a thing wouldn't happen. The word official was always there. Real officials, especially important ministers, spoke with a sense of propriety. Even if they were more than 90% sure, they wouldn't be so certain. They would always leave a way out for themselves, right? But today, the two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line, and their opinions were so different. This was so abnormal that it made Boromir even more hesitant. On the other hand, Duan was first surprised. Then he was overjoyed. Someone had finally jumped into the pit. It was his old rival. He really wanted to shout out loud to vent his excitement. He was so excited in his heart, but on the surface, Duan still suppressed his excitement, cupped his fists, and said to Ding Dingwei, "Good, Lord Left Prime Minister, if that's the case, we might as well make a bet. We will see the result in 2 days. But I still have one thing to say. If we want to negotiate with the mercenaries, then we will have to pay a higher price. Let's make a bet. But I still support sending reinforcements. If we send reinforcements too late, we can't afford to suffer any losses at the front line, Ding Dingwei said firmly. Then he stopped looking at Du-En and focused all his attention on King Boromir. Obviously, he was listening to the king's orders. The two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and spoke with great confidence. This way, Boromir was the one who had a headache. This was different from what he had expected. He wanted to see which side was right and support. But now that both sides were so strong, how could he make a decision? Boromir wanted to put his hands into his hair to calm down, but he knew that if he did so, it would be very unbecoming of him as a king. But in front of the two prime ministers, he had to give an explanation. After thinking about it, he decided to continue mediating. If he couldn't make the decision, then he would let the facts make the decision. All right, since the two prime ministers are so confident in their negotiations, why don't we all calm down and wait for a while? There should be news in 2 days. At that time, this king will know how to make a decision. Chapter 627. The king actually chose to wait, causing Ding Dingwei's expression to change. Your Majesty, you can't do that. This is exactly what some people are trying to do. If there are no reinforcements coming from the front, it will be a big problem. Your Majesty, what we should do now isn't to send reinforcements. Instead, we should immediately send a peace envoy to contact the mercenaries. This is the only way to resolve this matter with the smallest price. A long delay may lead to trouble. Du-En also called out. He looked very anxious, but only he knew how happy he was. He had already dug a hole for Ding Dingwei. Now he just had to wait 2 days to see the results. As for whether the king would agree to the peace talks now, he wasn't the one who would suffer a loss. Since the king wasn't anxious, why should he be anxious? The two prime ministers seemed to have the intention to quarrel again. Boromir immediately felt a headache coming on. He couldn't help but say in a slightly angry tone, all right, it's just 2 days later. Nothing major will happen. This matter is settled. Don't say anything else. The king was angry. Whether it was Ding Dingwei or Dun, they knew when to stop. They just glared at each other and left the palace after saluting. Not long after the two of them left, the whole story began to spread. First, some of the important ministers knew about this matter. Soon, the commoners on the streets were also very clear about it. King Boromir didn't say anything about it. He even knew that the two prime ministers must have deliberately spread the news in order to undermine each other. It was better for him to remain uninvolved in this matter. This way, he would be able to seize the initiative. Even the king was prepared to watch the show, and so were the officials and commoners. Soon, they formed 2 factions and began to have an intense discussion about who would win. The combat strength of the mercenaries naturally became the main topic of discussion. Those who supported Du-En would naturally say that the mercenaries were powerful and that they were omnipotent. Those who supported Ding Dingwei would naturally say that no matter how powerful the mercenaries were, they were too few in number. It was absolutely impossible for them to win a war against the 3 countries. Du-En's words were just to delay the reinforcements to support the front line. It was just to tear down the left prime minister's platform. This kind of action that sacrificed the interests of the country for one's own personal reputation was really too despicable. If it could be proven that Du-En was lying 2 days later, then he should be charged with the crime of harming the country. The people who supported both sides were still having an intense debate. There was no victory or defeat, but the mercenaries' reputation had already penetrated deep into the hearts of the commoners. This was especially true for the people who had escaped from Shangding City. Some of them had come to the capital, and through their mouths, they had described the mercenaries as incomparably terrifying. In the end, the mercenaries' reputation had been greatly increased. This was something that even Yunk had not expected. However, this was good news after all. Yunk quickly ordered his subordinates to spread all kinds of news about the mercenaries. For example, the commoners in Vietnam and Laos were living very well. With Yang Bao, once they obtained citizenship, they wouldn't be bullied anymore. If this news was spread during normal times, not only would it not be accepted, but it would also be criticized as a misconception. However, at this time, when the news was spread, not only did it attract a lot of attention, but it also attracted a lot of attention. The two sides were fighting, and for a while, there was no clear winner. Everyone was watching the show, but there were also people who were very depressed. For example, General Hun's senator, Hun's son, was still very strong. After losing Jujing City and becoming the general of the defeated army, he was escorted back to Golden Rim City. It was said that he was going to be punished. At this moment, his greedy behavior saved him. Because he was greedy for money, he became the child of wealth. As long as he had some influence in the imperial court and could speak, he would send people to give generous gifts to the officials. As a result, there were many people who spoke up for him. In the end, the left and right prime ministers spoke up together. The left prime minister Ding Ding Wei thought that at this time, although Hun's son had some small problems, he could still fight. Moreover, killing a general before the war was not good for the morale of the army, so he spoke up for him. The right prime minister Du and was much simpler. He had received enough money, so he naturally stood up and said a few good words. The two prime ministers had the same opinion, which was a very rare thing. In the end, King Boromir decided to give Hun Sen a chance to perform meritorious deeds. He even gave him military power and told him to be prepared to support Su Wong City at any time. But now, the two prime ministers had different opinions and couldn't decide who was better. Instead, Hun's son stopped supporting Su Wong City. He had no choice but to wait at home. But in his heart, he was cursing Du En. If it wasn't for the right prime minister, he would have been at the front line by now, and could even turn the situation around to prove his ability. No matter how the atmosphere in the king's city changed, time didn't stop flowing because of this. It was still moving forward on schedule. After tonight, it would be 2 days tomorrow. It was time for the Golden Rim Dynasty's fast horse scouts to return. The results would be revealed tomorrow. Dwayne became a little nervous. After all, he didn't get the news through his own channels. So after thinking about it, he went to the backyard to look for Skylark because he couldn't sleep. At this time, Yun Kei was not asleep. He seemed to have known that Duan would come. He set up a simple tea shed in the small courtyard and specially prepared an extra chair. Mr. Yun knew that I would come. As soon as Duan appeared here and saw the furnishings, he was shocked. Hee, we will see the results tomorrow. Right, Prime Minister, it is inevitable that you will be impatient. Come over and have a cup of tea to calm your mind. Yunk had a smile on his face as he casually pointed to the chair opposite him. Duan also wanted to hear Yun Kei say that there was no problem with the information, so he simply sat down. But just as he sat down, after hearing Yun Kei's next sentence, he suddenly jumped up. Yunk chuckled and said, "Actually, the previous news was just to tease right Prime Minister. The mercenaries at the front line need time to take down Suing City. They were afraid that you would send reinforcements and disrupt the plans of the Duke of Loyalty, so they made this plan." After hearing these words, Du En was frightened. He couldn't help but jump up. Then he angrily stared at Yun Kei, who was still sitting there and fiddling with the tea, and said, "Mr. Yun, don't make jokes at this time. Otherwise, people will die." This so-called death naturally meant that he would call the guards and servants of the mansion to kill Yun Kei in a fit of anger, because if all of this was true, he would become a tool in the hands of others. He would lose face and delay the important matters of the country. If that was really the case, he would become a sinner of the Golden Border dynasty. Duan was really angry. He even had an impulse to kill someone. Yun Ke acted as if he didn't hear anything. After finishing the last procedure of making tea, he raised his head and looked at the angry Duan and said, "Right, Prime Minister. Of course, I was joking." Huh. Duane's expression changed when he heard this. He didn't even know which sentence was true and which was false. Ha ha ha. Right, Prime Minister. Isn't what I said just now what you suspected in your heart? Yun Ke once again pointed to the chair opposite him, indicating that he could sit down. Then he casually said, "I just said what Right Prime Minister was thinking. But this only represents what you think, not what I think. I still have the same words. The news is incomparably accurate. Otherwise, I wouldn't stay here and wait for the confrontation, right?" Yun Ke dared to stay in the mansion, which was already a clear proof, unless he was playing a death game. Otherwise, he wouldn't take such a risk. This sentence finally made Du-En calm down a little. He sat down again. "Mr. Yun, is the news really true? You also know that the outside world is in chaos. If the news is not true, then this Prime Minister is really dead." "Of course it is true. I have already said this. Right, Prime Minister, have you thought about it? Once the news comes tomorrow that proves you are right, what should we do next?" Yun Ke was waiting for Duan's arrival, not to dispel the other party's worries, but to prepare for the next layout. Duan didn't know this. He was now thinking about the problem raised by Yun Quebec. He really didn't think about it. First, it was because he couldn't confirm the accuracy of the news. Second, he wanted to see left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei make a fool of himself. As for other things, he didn't have time to think about it. But since Yun Ke asked this question, he must have thought about it. This time, Duan asked with an attitude of asking for advice. "May I ask, Mr. Yun, what should this Prime Minister do next?" "You don't have to do anything. Just say that you are sick because you were suspected this time and go back to the mansion to stay. Let the left Prime Minister and the others mess around outside. The higher they jump, the harder they will fall in the future. When the time is right, Right Prime Minister will stand up and shout. That will be the best time to prove your ability." The smile on Yun Ke's face disappeared, replaced by a face of determination and decisiveness. Huh. Du-En was also a very smart person. He immediately thought of something and said, "Mr. Yun means to first give up the right to negotiate. And when those people can't reach an agreement, this Prime Minister will help to decide the overall situation." Yes. Yun Ke nodded with satisfaction. He praised the other party for being a smart person. Duane chuckled after hearing Skylark's praise. But then he frowned and said, "But if someone else completes the negotiation with the mercenaries, then wouldn't this Prime Minister have nothing to do with it?" Chapter 628. They won't be able to negotiate. The Duke of Loyalty has already sent me a message. Unless the right Prime Minister personally comes, it's useless for anyone to negotiate. Skylark said this with an incomparably confident tone as he smiled and looked at Dunn, who was sitting opposite him. "Oh, ha! Then I thank the Duke of Loyalty for your praise. Come, let me propose a toast to Mr. Yun. I wish us a happy cooperation." Dunn laughed as his worries were swept away. However, he did not know that the reason Yunk said so much to him and the reason why Yang Qindong wanted him to negotiate was because he wanted more benefits. As for what benefits he could get, he would know in the next few days. Dunn left Yunk's courtyard with satisfaction and went back to his room to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was already bright. While he was having breakfast, the butler suddenly came to report that the scouts he had sent to Ava and Siam had returned. They were now part of the royal palace. At the same time, they brought with them a huge piece of news. which was that the armies of the two countries had been defeated. They were mercilessly blocked outside the gates of Laos by the mercenaries, unable to enter at all. In other words, the information provided by Yunk was extremely accurate. This time, Dunn had made the right bet. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Listening to the information provided by the butler, Dwayne grinned widely. Everything was as Skylark had said. Now, he needed to rest according to the plan. Thus, he told the housekeeper, "Spread the news outside. Say that this prime minister has fallen ill due to mental exhaustion. It's not convenient for him to see any guests." The butler was puzzled. This time, his master had won. Shouldn't it be time for him to shine in the court? Why did he have to stay at home and not come out? However, he was only a butler and could not understand his master's thoughts. After seeing the stern look in Dunn's eyes, he immediately agreed and left to spread the news. At this time, the palace was already in a mess. The scouts had just returned and brought news from the front lines. The Ava and Siam armies' plan to surround Wei to rescue Zhao and attack Laos while it was empty had failed. Not only that, but the Siamese army had also suffered heavy losses. They had lost 3 rounds in a row, and their rations had been destroyed. As soon as Boromir heard the news, he knew that things were going south. Fortunately, he didn't send any reinforcements to the front lines, which meant that he didn't reveal his intention to fight to the death with the mercenaries. As such, there was still a chance for both sides to negotiate. Left Prime Minister Ding Wei stood there with his head lowered. There were many other officials standing in the hall. However, they all seemed to intentionally or unintentionally maintain a certain distance from him. It could be seen that this time he had miscalculated and lost to Right Minister Duen. According to the previous agreement, he would have to give up the position of Prime Minister and retire. If that was the case, who would put a person without power and influence in their eyes? There was no need to talk about respect. As if sensing the questioning gazes of the crowd, Ding Wei clenched his teeth. He suddenly cupped his fists and bowed to Boromir. "Your Majesty, this subject has lost. This subject will immediately resign as the left Prime Minister. 1 day later, this subject will pack up and leave the capital." "What are you doing? Did this king allow you to leave? It was just a joke. How can you take it seriously? I don't think the right Prime Minister will take it seriously." "Oh, right. Why isn't the right Prime Minister here?" Boromir was having a headache over the current situation, and Ding Wei's resignation came. In such a chaotic situation, how could he agree to it? Since Boromir was the one who said that, even if Dwayne was here, he wouldn't be able to say anything, let alone when he wasn't here. When Boromir asked this question, everyone noticed that the right Prime Minister wasn't in the hall. Many of the officials started whispering to each other. Some of them even thought that the right Prime Minister was using this opportunity to raise his own status. "Just wait. He will definitely appear in a moment, and then he will stand here with the attitude of a victor and judge the world." More than one person had the same thought. Just as they thought that Dwayne was going to make a grand entrance, a eunuch quietly walked up to Boromir and whispered something into his ear. "Oh, is there such a thing? Is the right Prime Minister really ill?" Boromir turned his head after hearing the eunuch's words and asked with a look of surprise. When he received the news from the scouts, he wanted to give Duen some praise or even substantial benefits. After all, this time, Duen didn't immediately send reinforcements. This was equivalent to creating a buffer zone with the mercenaries. It was equivalent to saving the Golden Border dynasty and not pushing them into a hopeless situation. But he didn't expect that at such a critical time, Duen would fall ill. This was too much of a coincidence. At least, he didn't believe it. The eunuch we sent to bring him into the palace replied that the right prime minister's face was ugly. His whole body was trembling, and he was lying in bed. It seems that he is really ill. But in order to find out the truth, we have sent the imperial physician to the right prime minister's residence. I think there will be news soon. The old eunuch replied respectfully. Good. Inform this king as soon as there is news. Boromir nodded. This time, whether Duen was really ill or not, he wouldn't punish him. It was understandable. After all, wasn't it human nature for people to vent their grievances after being wronged? But this time, Boromir still underestimated Duen's determination. This was a person who could be ruthless to his enemies, but even more ruthless to himself. In order to make it seem like he was really sick, he actually asked the housekeeper to get some ice from the cellar. Then he turned it into ice water and poured it on his body. In this way, he really caught a cold. His whole body was cold, and he fell ill. The scout's return had confirmed that what Yunk said was true. Since that was the case, what harm was there in trusting him again? He just hoped that the next development would be, as Yunk said. Otherwise, it would be a waste to get sick this time. The imperial physician came and found that Duen had indeed caught a cold. The imperial physician immediately prescribed medicine, and then returned to the palace to report. What? He is really ill? After the old eunuch said the news, King Boromir was shocked. It seemed that the right prime minister was really under a lot of pressure this time. Of course, this was just a passing thought. After ordering the old eunuch to send the imperial physician to see the right prime minister, he put his thoughts on the court. He didn't make a decision just now because he had been waiting for the right prime minister to come. Since he couldn't come, the matter of the peace talks could only be handed over to someone else. Although it was someone else, there weren't many people who could really choose. How powerful was the mercenary army? The position of the person sent to negotiate was too low. How could he talk to them on equal terms? Wouldn't it be shameful if the person sent couldn't even see the face of the king? After thinking about it, Boromir still chose the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei. The left prime minister also wanted to use this opportunity to repay the king's kindness. Of course, he didn't hesitate to agree. After only 2 hours, Ding Ding Wei, who had made some preparations, left Goldenrim City and went straight to Suing City. The reason why he was in such a hurry was naturally because he knew that speed was the most important thing in war. Now that the two allies had lost the war, if the Goldenrim dynasty didn't make a move, who knew if the other side would gather all the troops to attack the Goldenrim dynasty in anger? Once they made this decision, it would be even more difficult to negotiate with them. The carriage sped along the way. Who knew how many horses were changed on the road? Normally, it would take 5 or 6 days to reach Suing City, but Ding Ding Wei only took 3 days. As soon as he arrived, he sent people to the mercenary camp outside the city to express the Goldenrim dynasty's intention to negotiate and stop the war. At this moment, Suing City was already full of holes. These days, the mercenary army's cannons didn't stop firing. It was unknown when a powerful shell would fall, and every time it fell, it would cause a lot of damage in the city. Chapter 6:29. All right. Duen nodded, as if this was how it should be. This scene infuriated Ding Ding Wei greatly. In the past, when there was a war, it was always the generals who were in charge of the war, and the civil officials who were in charge of the peace. But now, as soon as Dagon heard that they were going to negotiate, he agreed without hesitation. From this, it could be seen that they were really outnumbered by the mercenaries. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that this time's negotiation wouldn't go smoothly? Now, he just hoped that the other party would not ask for too much. Ding Ding Wei was destined to be disappointed. Although the mercenaries quickly gave an answer and welcomed them to the peace talks, when Ding Ding Wei went to the mercenary camp the next day, He didn't see the famous Duke of Loyalty from the great Ming dynasty, but only 2 regimental political commissars. He knew that the peace talks this time wouldn't go so smoothly. He couldn't even see the main characters, which was a bad sign. The people who met Ding Dingwei were the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, and the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment, Chun Bo. This was also Yang Qindong's intention to train these people's political skills. Of course, the 2 of them were prepared when they came. That was, Chun Bo would play the good cop, and Kong Jia would play the bad cop. When the red and white figures first met with Ding Dingwei, they opened their mouths wide and proposed conditions that Ding Dingwei could not accept. According to the 2 political commissars, the war could be stopped, but the Phnom Penh dynasty had to submit to the Duke of Loyalty. At the same time, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty had to be divided into provinces like Vietnam and Laos. King Boromir had to leave the palace and be taken to a mysterious place according to the mercenaries. He would be put under house arrest for the rest of his life. The other ministers would have to hand over half of their property to protect themselves, and so on. These were completely overbearing terms. One could imagine how dark Ding Dingwei's face would be when he heard this. Then he laughed out of anger. What's the difference between your demands and occupying the Phnom Penh dynasty by force? Of course there is. If we were to attack, a minister like you wouldn't be able to save your life just by handing over half of your wealth. Chun Bo, who was in charge of playing the bad guy, said without hesitation, Are you so confident that you can take down our gilded border dynasty? Don't you know that even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered? When we are both injured, Siam and Awa will join forces to attack. I'm afraid you will have to pay a heavy price, Ding Dingwei said in a threatening tone. He didn't believe that the mercenaries would be so bold as to not care about other countries. If that was the case, they wouldn't have just surrounded Su Wang City. They would have directly attacked it. At this point, Chun Bo suddenly thought of something and said, "Oh, right, the reason why you came here must be because you heard the news that we defeated the Siamese and Ava army. Yes, if you were willing to negotiate before this, we would still be able to do so. But now, either you surrender or wait for my mercenaries to blast your heart with their guns." Is this the opinion of the loyal Duke? After feeling Chun Bo's tough attitude, Ding Dingwei knew that there would be no result if he continued to talk to this person, so he wanted to see the higher-ups. Perhaps it was easy to meet the King of Hell, but difficult to deal with the little demons. This is not the opinion of the loyal Duke, but the opinion of most of our military generals. Chun Bo turned his head and said with a very arrogant look, just like that, the first meeting ended without any results. Just as Ding Dingwei returned to Su Wang City with a belly full of anger, a few cannonballs suddenly flew over his head. One of them even landed not far from his team. He didn't know if it was a random shot or if it was done on purpose to give him a show of strength. The bombardment continued. There was no fixed time, no fixed location, and no fixed number of shells. It seemed that everything depended on the mood of the mercenaries. When he was in a good mood, he would only fire once every half a day. When he was in a bad mood, he would fire a few times, causing the people in the city to panic. Even the morale in the barracks was declining day by day. If General Dagan had not sent an inspection team to keep watch at the rear, there would have been many deserters. The atmosphere in the city became more and more serious, and the pressure on Ding Dingwei also increased. He went to the mercenary camp for 3 days in a row. One of the negotiators, Chun Bo, didn't treat him well, although there was another negotiator, Kong Jia, who constantly adjusted the atmosphere in the middle. The negotiations didn't break down. The content didn't change much. Ding Dingwei had no choice but to write the situation in a memorial and send it back to the capital, Phnom Penh City. When the news reached the capital, King Boromir couldn't sit still. If the mercenaries were determined to take down Phnom Penh like how they took down Jiaoji and Lansang. Then what could they use to stop them? Yes, they still had an army of more than 300,000 soldiers. If they fought, they would be able to cause a certain amount of damage to the mercenaries or even severely injure them. This gave the two allied countries a chance to fight back. But in this way, Phnom Penh was destined to be turned into a sieve or even destroyed. In this case, what benefits did it have to do with them? What should they do? Boromir, who was cursing Siam and Awa in his heart, could only think of a solution. Fortunately, there was good news at this time. The old eunuch beside him said that the right Prime Minister, Dun, had recovered. Although he wasn't as healthy as before, as long as he didn't do strenuous exercise, he wouldn't have any problems doing ordinary work. Quick, summon the right Prime Minister. When he heard the news, Boromir was like a person walking in the darkness who saw the light of dawn, and he shouted excitedly. Dun's illness was indeed cured. It was originally a self-inflicted cold. Because it was treated in time, it looked more serious 2 days ago. Now, he had been recuperating for more than a week. Naturally, he was fine. Of course, Dun was able to recover so quickly thanks to Yun Kei's help. Mr. Yun said that it was time for him to come back, and it was also time for him to make a contribution. With the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, it would be very advantageous for Dun to take over the negotiations, especially in terms of conditions. The facts had proven that Yun Kei's words could be trusted. Of course, Dun had to stand up. At this time, he could be said to be in high spirits. Even when he followed the eunuch into the palace, he was still arrogant and confident. As Yun Kei said, the left Prime Minister hit a wall in the front line. The king didn't really want to fight with the mercenaries, and the negotiation force would become the mainstream. Naturally, it was time for him to perform, because Yun Kei said that in the entire Golden Border dynasty, only he could handle the negotiation. Of course, in return, this time, he had to fight for a certain amount of rights for the mercenaries. For this reason, Dun basically agreed without hesitation. Perhaps others would think that he was betraying his country's rights, but only he knew that, if he didn't, there would be someone else to take over this position. Not to mention, if he could protect the Golden Border dynasty at this time, it would be a great achievement. Not to mention, he could also attack the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei. This had always been his wish. Since he could make His Majesty happy, make the mercenaries happy, and make himself happy, why not do such a thing? Dun walked into the side hall and saw King Boromir sitting high above. He saw that the king's eyes lit up, and then his face was full of smiles. Ha! The right Prime Minister is here. This king's heart is at ease. Come, give the Prime Minister a seat. Giving a seat was a very high courtesy, and something like this had never happened before. Just this action alone could prove a lot of things. At this time, Dun's heart was at ease. After more than 2 hours, Dun walked out of the palace with a satisfied face. Boromir had approved that he would replace the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, to negotiate with the mercenaries in Suwang. Not only that, the king even told Dun the bottom line. As long as he followed the bottom line, he would have more freedom to play. Early the next morning, Dun set off from Golden Border City and went straight to Suwang City. The Foreign Affairs Director of the Security Bureau, Yun Kei, was also with the convoy. With Dun's departure to the front line, his task was equivalent to more than 80% completed. The next step was to finalize some of the details of the negotiation. In fact, after Dun returned to his residence yesterday, he had an in-depth communication with Yun Kei about the negotiation. In this regard, Yun Kei had already been authorized by Yang Chendong, and his decision was the mercenaries' decision. Finally, after a sincere communication, the final plan of the negotiation was finalized. That was, the Golden Border dynasty made the following concessions. First, General Hun's son publicly apologized to the Solingen family of Laos and compensated them with a total of 300,000 silver taels. In fact, the Solingen family's loss was only 170,000 silver taels. Second, the Golden Border dynasty would compensate the mercenaries with 1.5 million silver taels, which would be used as military funds for the mercenaries, and 500,000 tons of copper and iron. Third, cede Shandong City and all the territories north of the city to Laos. The mercenaries would withdraw to the north of Shandong City and would not infringe on the interests of the Golden Border dynasty without any reason. Fourth, the two sides would exchange business. Each had its own independent sovereignty and could station diplomatic missions to ensure a friendly relationship for generations. Once one side was attacked by others for no reason, the other side was obliged to send troops to help. That was to say, after these events, the Golden Border dynasty and Laos had formed a military alliance. Of course, the agreement was written that once a war broke out, the troops would be sent, but the number would depend on the mood. There was no specific number. In a way, it was not a breach of the contract to send only one person. As the governor of Lao Province, Wan Xiaochen had said that as long as you became a legal citizen of Lao Province, no matter where you were, no matter what happened, as long as you encountered any difficulties or injustice, the provincial government would stand up for you, solving the difficulties and finding justice at the same time. Naturally, many people scoffed at this. Most of them were merchants. They were not as ignorant as ordinary people. They had traveled extensively for many years and had been to countless places. Naturally, their horizons were not something that ordinary people could compare to. It was precisely because they had seen too many things that they did not believe that anyone could make decisions for them. Although they were very rich, their social status was not high. In the eyes of others, they were full of the stench of money. When it came to the degree of real respect, they were often inferior to some ordinary people. Soldiers, farmers, workers, and merchants. Merchants were ranked last. The general trend was like this. Why should they believe that the Lao provincial government would really protect their rights, although they had paid a lot of business taxes? Now, no one dared to say such a thing. What happened to the Solingens had proven everything. Not only did General Hun's son of the Phnom Penh dynasty personally apologize and pay compensation, but he also invited the Solingens to do business in the Phnom Penh dynasty. They bowed their heads, paid compensation, and even took the initiative to invite them. Did this not prove the status of merchants? As the patriarch of the Solingens, Nong Si was very proud of himself. He was actively preparing goods to go to the Phnom Penh dynasty in person. After all, with the mercenaries as their backing, it could be imagined that the Phnom Penh dynasty would never dare to play any tricks. Did they really want to fight another war and pay compensation again? Sual Langan was not the only merchant family in Laos. There were many other businesses that were not weaker than them, and some were even stronger than them. They all saw the opportunity and began to contact Governor Luan, creating all kinds of opportunities to get along and meet. Some of the big families even found the youngest and most beautiful girls in their families and gave them to Wan Xiaochen as concubines in order to strengthen the relationship between the two sides. After Yang Qindong heard about this matter, he even gave instructions that if Wan Xiaochen was willing, he could marry a few high-quality foreign women as concubines. Because he did not forget the expectations Wan Xiaoqi and Wan Xiaoqi and Zhou Hua had for this son when he left Crimson City. One of the most important things was the important matter of marrying a wife and having children. Even Wan Xiaoyu had mentioned it twice in front of him for the first time, showing the importance Wan family placed on this matter. Of course, according to Yang Qindong's intentions, he could take a woman from another race as a concubine, but it was impossible for him to take her as a wife. It had to be a Han woman in order to ensure the purity of his bloodline. He did not want the country that his generation had worked so hard to build to be swallowed up by their children with foreign bloodline. In fact, not only did Yang Qindong have such requirements for Yuan Shaoqian, but also for all the senior cadres and senior officers. When you reach a certain age, you can marry a high-quality woman from outside the clan as your concubine, but you absolutely cannot let her become your wife. If anyone dares to do so and is found out, then I'm sorry, but everything you have now will become zero. You will also be removed from the cadre and become an ordinary citizen, vanishing into the crowd. Since Yang Qindong had spoken, the business groups paid more attention to this matter. Yuan Shaoqian also had an extra job, which was to go back and forth between the various big families after work. It was to get closer to them and, at the same time, to arrange blind dates. Not to mention, there was really a lucky woman that he took a fancy to and married as a concubine. With the previous example, the other merchant families were even more enthusiastic about this matter. Invitations for Yuan Shaoqian to attend banquets were placed all over the office desk. The reason why the merchants were so crazy was naturally because of the benefits. Compared to the ordinary people, their gratitude was much purer. This was especially so when Yang Bao published a series of punishments for this matter, using the World Knowledge Tea House to make it known to everyone, regardless of whether it was the elderly of 70 years old or the children of 3 years old. They all knew about this matter. They knew that as citizens of Lao Province, they had more security when they went out, and they could receive the respect of others from the bottom of their hearts. This was something that they did not even dare to think about before. Lao Province had led them to do it. In order to express their gratitude, the ordinary people could only lower their heads and work hard. Those of suitable age naturally chose to join the military to ensure that the fruits of their labor would not be stolen by others. They were just this kind of people. If someone treated them well, they would treat that person well. This was the will of the people. After this matter, the hearts of the people started to submit. After Yuan Shaoqian gave out the various government orders, they were always quickly implemented, and Lao Province entered a period of rapid development. When Yang Qindong brought the main force of the mercenaries back to Wanxiang City, he saw this scene of prosperity, which made him very happy. In order to create enough space and environment for Lao Province and Vietnam Province to develop, he also sent messengers to Siam and Ava to discuss cooperation. There were no eternal enemies, only eternal benefits. Business alliances could strengthen each other. Since this was the case, why did they have to fight? Even the powerful mercenaries were willing to put down their weapons. They naturally went with the flow and agreed to a temporary peace. However, everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. Now was the time to develop and strengthen themselves. After dealing with the external threats, there was no problem with the internal integration. At this time, Yang Qindong was also about to leave Lao Province. The Security Bureau was now sending a telegram every day reporting the situation between Northern Ming and Walla. There had already begun a small-scale skirmish between the armies. If it continued to develop like this, and there was no one to control it, it was likely that the war would be unstoppable. Since this was the case, Yang Qindong would definitely want to take a share of the profits. In addition, because their foundation was not strong enough, Lao Province could not meet the requirements for expansion in a short period of time. There was no point in staying here, so his departure was inevitable. Yang Qindong decided to leave. The first to leave was the main force led by Commander Lung Song. Chichen City could not be without a strong military force, so someone had to go back and defend it. After they left, the 6th young master also decided on the people he would bring with him when he left. It was Lung Feng Wusheng's 3rd Regiment. as well as 6 auxiliary battalions who had experienced hundreds of battles and already possessed decent battle strength. As long as they were trained a little more, they would definitely become the Lung Fong in the future. The ones left behind were Luo Po's 2nd Regiment, which was responsible for the security of Lao Province and Vietnam. Yang Qindong had basically agreed to expand Luo Po's 2nd Regiment into the 2nd Division of the Lung Fong. The selection and assessment of personnel had to be carried out in Chichen City. He could not be careless about the background check. The Lung Fong was his most elite force, so there would definitely be a situation that he could not control. If that was the case, he would rather not expand. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.